On an average school day, Haruka is sitting alone at his desk because he is a total loner. He is well aware that he is a loner, and as a matter of fact, he enjoys being alone since his only other option would be to hang out with his classmates, and he freaking hates them. There are a bunch of groups in the class, including the delinquents, the popular girls, the gym bros, and then there's the other people no one cares about. Haruka doesn't belong in any of these groups, and he is fine with that since he has a lot more time to read his books with no friends, but his reading session is interrupted when bright light appears beneath him. It looks like a summoning circle is spawning beneath the students, and for a moment Haruka got excited because he knows this means he gets to go on an isekai adventure, but then he realizes that he's been getting too much screen time for a loner. And if he knows anything about isekai, that means he's going to get screwed over somehow. He's not about to let himself become a victim before GTA 6 drops. So while the portal is still loading, he walks up to the door and tries to leave. Unfortunately, the door seems to be bolted shut with magic, so no matter how much force he uses, he isn't able to get out of the room. The portal is almost done loading, so his classmates begin disappearing, fading away, and as a last-ditch effort to avoid his otherworldly fate, Haruka decides to crawl into the ceiling vents to wait out the summoning circle. He jumps up and manages to crawl his way into the roof of the class. But just when he thought he was safe, the summoning circle followed him through the roof and he ended up getting summoned anyway. It sucks that he couldn't stay on Earth, but since he already knows how this kind of thing goes, he expects some kind of fat king or pretty princess to show up soon and ask for his help or something. However, that's not what happens as Haruka sees a bald old man frantically waving his arms around and panicking at the sight of Haruka. Apparently, the old man is God, and he was the one in charge of the summoning and has already sent all of Haruka's classmates off to the other world. But because Haruka came up with the idea to hide in the ceiling, while he still ended up getting summoned, his summoning was delayed, so God needs to send him to the other world quickly before he gets in trouble for this mess. He tells Haruka that he will get abilities to help him in the other world, but since he's late, all the good abilities have already been chosen, so the only things remaining are all the leftover ones that no one wanted. To list a few, he has the option of picking skills that equate to Minecraft Villager, gambling dice, contact lenses, and a stick. And to make it worse, he only has a limited number of skills he can choose, so Haruka begins taking out his anger on the god for summoning him here and only having trash skills left. The god knows he messed up, but he didn't graduate from God University just to get yelled at by a high schooler. So he tells Haruka that he will give him all the remaining trash skills as an apology, but he doesn't want to see his ugly face around here anymore, so he teleports Haruka to the other world immediately. It's cool that he gets to have more skills than normal, but that doesn't do him much good if he gets tossed out into the woods as soon as he arrives. He's never lived in the woods before and he has no supplies, but then he notices a pouch on the floor and it turns out that it's a part of the Minecraft Villager skill, and the pouch allows him to store an unlimited number of items in his inventory. There's also a bunch of starter gear in there, so at least Haruka isn't going to be doing this without equipment. After he's got his stuff on, he decides to check his stats, but thanks to the gambling dice, he needs to roll a number to get stat points. He just goes with it and throws the dice on the ground, so as a result he ends up with a score of M, and he has no idea what M means, so he just decides to put the M points all into his luck stat. To his surprise, when he opens his stat window, his luck stat is completely maxed out, making him wish he used it on something better. He continues looking through his stats, and to his surprise, aside from all the trash skills, he actually gained 2 unique skills as well. Because he was such a loner on Earth, he will be unable to form a party in this world even if he wants to. But in exchange, his second skill allows him to force monsters to serve him because he wouldn't be able to make any friends otherwise. Haruka is a bit disappointed that he won't get a chance to make a harem for himself, but it is what it is. Right now, he's more concerned with the fact that he doesn't see any of his classmates nearby, and he finds that strange since this is supposedly the starting location. But then again, he never cared about them before, so why would he care about them now? Right now, he needs to focus on getting supplies so he can live a good life out here in the woods, but that's a lot easier said than done when he can barely see anything with all the trees in the way. At this rate, it won't be long before he runs into a monster accidentally, and if that were to happen, he would be a dead man for sure. Just then, Haruka remembers that he has a contact lens skill, so he puts on the contact lenses and suddenly he can see all kinds of information about his surroundings. It turns out that the contact lenses come with an inbuilt appraisal skill, and with it, he is able to easily traverse the forest and find some mushrooms that he can eat without dying. He decides to pick some, and thanks to his villager bag, he can take as many as he wants. He then goes over to the river nearby and uses his bag to fetch a little water to drink. But once he's done with that, something else catches his eye, so he wanders back into the forest where he finds a little cave. It looks too interesting for him to ignore, so Haruka says a little prayer in case there's a monster here that will attack him. And after that, he begins exploring the cave. Luckily, it looks like there aren't any monsters here, and this place is quite spacious, so he decides to make this his base of operations. He pulls out a tent and a magic lantern from his bag to set up camp, after which he then proceeds to light a small fire with his temperature control magic so he can stay warm for the night. Coincidentally, using his temperature magic once allowed him to unlock a new fire, and being wary of monsters made him acquire several detection skills as well, but Haruka's only attack skill is a stick, so he still needs to figure out a way to defend himself. The next morning, Haruka wakes up with a jolt, so nervously leaves his tent, and to his relief, it looks like there weren't any monster attacks overnight. He is safe all thanks to the anti-monster properties of his useless skill items. But even if he is safe from harm, it doesn't mean he's safe from her hunger, so he busts out a frying pan and cooks up some of the mushrooms he gathered yesterday. And if you're wondering where he got the frying pan, it was just sitting there in his villager bag along with a full set of kitchen knives and some beef jerky. So far, that bag has been the most useful thing in Haruka's arsenal, so he wonders what kind of villager stocked it up before he got it. In any case, now that he has eaten, he needs to figure out what he's going to do from now on, so he heads outside and takes a little walk to think. For now, that cave will work well as a base of operations, but Haruka still needs to worry about finding a reliable source of food and creating safety measures against any monsters that may try to attack him in this world. Fortunately, with his contact lenses, it shouldn't be too hard for him to gather enough food to last for a while as he finds some more mushrooms and some herbs almost immediately, but he still has to figure out a solution to his monster problem. Just then, Haruka's detection skill kicks in, and he notices something going on nearby, so he decides to go check it out and is horrified once he realizes that the noise was caused by goblins. It would be bad enough if it was one, but there's two of them, and they both have strength stats that are higher than his own. He wonders if he will be able to take them down with his current strength, and he contemplates running away, but the fact that he is living in this forest means he will eventually have to fight the goblin if he wants to survive, so he chooses to get it over with while he still has the element of surprise. With that said, he isn't sure his stick will be good enough for the job on its own, so he tries using one of his trash to wrap the stick in magic to see if that does anything. It works out better than he thought, so he lunges out of the bushes and strikes at one of the goblins. After smacking it on the head, the goblin is dazed and confused, but Haruka doesn't stop there and proceeds to beat the daylights out of it until it finally dies. That's one down, but Haruka still has to deal with the other one, so as it charges at him, he dodges out of the way of its attack. Now that he has gotten a feel for it, Haruka realizes that the goblin's attacks are actually really easy to predict, so he effortlessly evades it and then proceeds to smack it around before hitting it with a wave of magic. Having just won his first fight against goblins, Haruka thinks that's enough work for the day and decides to head back to the cave so he can rest a little, and once he's back, he roasts some mushrooms for dinner and takes a look at the club he looted off the goblin corpse. It may have high damage, but it's heavy and has a short range, so Haruka decides to continue using his stick for now. He then checks the rest of his stats, and to his surprise, he managed to level up from the fight he had today, and not only that, all his existing stats were doubled as a result. By the next morning, Haruka wakes up and has breakfast as usual, but he is starting to get sick of eating nothing but mushrooms all the time. He really wishes he could eat some meat out here, but he's going to have to learn how to hunt to do that, and before that, needs to learn how to enhance himself first. The first thing he wants to try is the magic fusion skill he acquired, and for a quick explanation, it basically covers his entire body with magic in order to boost his physical and magical defenses. It also greatly increases his strength, so he should be able to fight with much more efficiency. Additionally, his appraisal skill was upgraded to level 2, so he uses it to see if anything has changed, but the only difference is that there's a question mark next to all the descriptions. Haruka has clearly never played video games before because he spends a whole minute trying to figure out what a question mark icon could mean, and eventually he just gives up on it altogether. Instead, he heads outside to do some magic training, and as he is leaving, he notices something on the floor, so he picks it up thinking it might be some meat, but it turns out to be another mushroom. It may be delusional, but Haruka was really hoping meat would just grow on trees in this world, and he soon realizes that he's not going to be finding any meat on the forest floor, so he decides to just go ahead with his magic training. He activates his mana infusion and takes a step forward, but with the physical boost he gets, he ends up flying forward by several meters. His body feels much lighter than before, and with very little effort, he can easily dart around the forest almost like he's teleporting. On top of that, his dexterity is greatly enhanced as well, so he can move and strike at things with precision. The first thing he does with his enhanced strength is challenge 2 random goblins, and unlike yesterday, he is able to knock the goblin out in one hit. He is feeling really confident about his new strength, so he thinks he can handle even more goblins, but when he actually sees a group of 3 goblins, he starts having second thoughts and slowly backs away before he gets jumped. He decides that he has worked hard enough for today and heads back to his cave so he can practice his magic. He continues this routine and practices fighting during the day, and by night, he starts tinkering with his magic to see what he can do with it. And apparently, he can make coffee tables. By following this routine, Haruka is able to eventually one-shot a goblin and create a proper table with his magic crafting. So he then uses it to create a gate for his cave so he can go out at night. And that means he can finally go hunting. He goes after a rabbit because he hasn't tasted meat in so long, and when he finally catches up to it and is about to start cooking, he notices something else nearby. At first he thinks it's a goblin, but upon further inspection, he finds out that it's something even worse. Those are the delinquents from his class, and he really doesn't want to have to deal with them, so he intends to sneak away in the other direction, but as he starts heading that way, he realizes the popular girls are here as well, along with the gym bros and the nerds. He doesn't think the nerds are that bad since he occasionally hung out with them back in school, but he still doesn't want to have to talk to them though. Finally, he notices the student council group which has the class rep in it. And while he may hate socializing with the people in his class, he has to admit that the class rep has always been really nice to him, so it would be the least he could do to return that kindness, even if it's just to say hello. He briefly considers revealing himself and talking to her, but then again, he doesn't want to ruin the solitary life he already has. Since no one knows that he is here, he has the chance to be truly alone like he has always wanted. There's no idle chatter, no taxes, and no one to annoy him, so he really doesn't want to mess that up by having contact with his classmates because they are already pretty annoying. That's why he officially decides that he will ignore his classmates and live by himself so he can conquer this world alone. He then ducks into a bush to keep himself hidden as the delinquents approach, and one of them could have sworn he heard someone in this direction, and he is closing in on the bushes Haruka is hiding in. But as he checks inside, all he finds is the bunny, so he and the others continue walking. Haruka is relieved that they didn't find him, but he decides to follow them so he can figure out if they are planning something. He listens closely as the delinquents have a highly intellectual conversation about their class VP's chest, and Haruka is disappointed because he thought he would at least learn something useful from them. With no laws to stop them, Haruka is a little worried about what the delinquents might do to the girls, but he's sure the class rep will put a stop to whatever they are trying to do because she always does. However, Haruka soon overhears the delinquents talk about using a nerd called Tanaka for his ability so they can do whatever they want. The delinquents then get up to head back to camp, and Haruka can tell that they are up to no good, but he can't bring himself to intervene because that would require social interaction, and he is firmly against that. He heads back to his cave and starts grilling some mushrooms, but then he notices something that completely devastates him. His loner skill just leveled up, meaning even his status board recognizes him as a loner. This is probably because he chose to avoid his classmates, but still, it's not the worst thing that could happen. If anything, he would like to level up more because his overall level is still only 3. The main reason for this is that he has 2 skills that he can't level, his Jack of all trades and dummy skills. To be honest, he's not even sure what the skills do. Jack of all trades probably means he will be good at most things he tries, but he will never be able to become a master in any particular craft. And that's pretty straightforward. But as for the dummy skill, the best explanation Haruka can come up with is something to do with puppets, but he's not sure about it. He decides to give up on trying to figure it out for now and just eat his dinner, but he still really wishes he had some meat. Haruka calls it a day and goes to bed for the night, but as he is trying to get some sleep, he hears a huge ruckus outside, and he can't just ignore it, so he gets up to figure out what's going on. As he left his cave, he was expecting to see the delinquents up to no good again, but to his surprise, it was actually the nerds this time. They are currently fighting a bunch of goblins, and it looks like they are having a bit of trouble, so Haruka considers helping them out, but he changes his mind once he sees their stats. They've got skills that are way better than his, and they are all level 16 while Haruka is still level 3. He figures they'll be alright without him, so he turns to walk away, but just before he leaves, he spots 2 goblins sneaking up behind the group, and the nerds are already struggling as things are, so if they get attacked from behind, and they'll be wiped out for sure. Haruka is still on the fence about whether he should help them or not, But then he remembers the time the nerds shared their holographic Charizard with him, and he then decides that they are worth saving. He runs out of the bushes with a stick in hand, and he easily one-shots both goblins in one swing. He then turns to the nerds and asks them if they are alright, and the nerds are fine, but they are shocked to see Haruka out here. Once they've gotten reacquainted, the nerds thank Haruka for his help, but he is having a hard time communicating with them since he hasn't spoken to real people for a long time now. He eventually takes them all back to his place, and the nerds are all amazed by how nice the interior is considering it's a cave. Haruka explains that he learned a little earth magic and crafting to help with the remodeling, but the nerds still think it's impressive that he did all this by himself. Haruka prepares a drink for them all and asks why they were out in the middle of the woods so late at night. The nerds suddenly fall silent when the topic is brought up, and after a few seconds, they tell Haruka that they are actually on the run from the rest of the class right now. It all started after the class first got isekai'd here, and at first everyone was just surprised by everything that just happened, but they were soon faced with the reality that they are stuck here, and they started freaking out over it. A few of them were more calm about the situation, like the popular girls who seemed like they were more annoyed than scared, the jocks who were trying to figure out what to do but knew nothing about isekai, and the nerds who were totally within their element. The class rep was just as confused as everyone else, but she has the common sense to realize that crying in an unknown forest is a good way to attract unwanted predators and get them all killed, so she tries to get everyone to quiet down. However, it was too late as a group of goblins had already found the class, and the class rep has no idea how to handle these monsters, so she starts freaking out. Everyone else is freaking out as well, even the delinquents, but the nerds know someone has to handle this, so they all activate their skills so they can take down the goblins. The gym bros join in to help, and soon enough, all the goblins have been defeated, but it still isn't safe to be out here, so the class rep gets everyone's attention and says they should all find somewhere safe to stay before they get attacked again. A little while later, the class settled on setting up camp by the river, and the nerds took it upon themselves to teach everyone how to survive in this world with all the isekai knowledge they possessed. The duties were evenly divided among all the members of the class, and everything seemed like it was going well until the popular girls suddenly said, "Nah, we don't want to do any work." The class rep tried to convince them that the work was necessary, and all they had to do was help set up the tents, but the girls just didn't want to bother with it. And since the popular girls weren't doing anything, the delinquents decided that they would be lazy as well, leaving the class rep and the nerds to do all the work instead. On top of that, the nerds went out of their way to handle all the monsters that would try to attack the camp, and while it seemed like a lot of work, they had to do this for their own sake. Back in the White Room, the nerds saw two particularly disturbing skills get chosen. One was the charm spell that grants control over people, and another troubling one was the puppeteer skill, which pretty much does the same thing. They knew that one of the delinquents possessed the puppeteer skill, so the nerds wanted to level up quickly in order to be able to defend themselves against the delinquents. However, at night, the delinquents would go out and slay monsters as well, but only for the sake of leveling up so they can use their skills. And while the nerds were eavesdropping on them, they began talking about how they will turn the girls into their slaves once they have enough levels to use their skills. The nerds realized that this would mean a lot of trouble, so they went to warn the class rep about it. However, just a few days later, the delinquents have leveled up enough to use their skills, and the class rep just so happened to be nearby, so they planned to make her their first victim. However, they ended up getting jumped by the nerds, and once they were down, their skills were sealed away, so they wouldn't be able to cause any harm. Now the delinquents are basically powerless, and as you would expect, the girls didn't take it well when they found out about the plan the delinquents had made, so the delinquents were kicked out of the camp. That would have been the end of it, but the delinquents were petty, so later that night, while the nerds weren't around to beat them up, the delinquents attacked the camp just to mess with everyone and ended up burning everything to the ground. Once there was nothing left, the delinquents retreated back into the forest, and by the time the nerds returned to camp, they were devastated to discover that all their hard work had been destroyed. Worse yet, the popular girls somehow blamed them for all the destruction and were giving them a really hard time for antagonizing the delinquents. The class rep stood up for them and reminded everyone that the nerds are the only reason they've been surviving out here so far, and the nerds appreciated the class rep having their backs, but they couldn't spend another minute in a camo full of such ungrateful people, which is why they all went on the run. After hearing the whole story, Haruka feels really bad for them, so he decides to host a feast of mushrooms for them that night. He actually enjoyed spending time with other people for once, but by the next day, the nerds had to leave because they planned on heading downstream to find a village and start their lives as adventurers. They offer to let Haruka join them because they consider him a friend, and while Haruka thinks of them as friends as well, he still has to decline their offer because he believes his trash skills would only hold the nerds back. With that said, he is also a bit worried about the situation at the class camp, mostly because the class rep is still there, and she's the only other person in the class that he likes, so he decides to go check it out. Along the way, he randomly runs into a kobold, and the thing bites him a lot, but ultimately, he manages to kill it and continue his journey. By nighttime, he arrived at the riverside where the class camp should have been, but surprisingly, the place is totally deserted. He assumes they must have moved somewhere else, so he uses one of his detection skills to pick up some footprints and follows them until he eventually comes across the popular girls. Of everyone in the class, Haruka hates dealing with them the most, so he tries to turn around and head home, but the girls have already started chasing him. Haruka would have no trouble outrunning them, but he stops dead in his tracks when he hears them say the word please. In all the years Haruka has known them, please has never been in their vocabulary, so something serious must have happened for them to be this desperate. He decides to talk to them after all, and the first thing the girls do is ask him if he knows where the nerds went. Haruka is hesitant to tell them because he thinks they just want to yell at the nerds some more, but on the contrary, the girls actually want to apologize to them. They now realize how much the nerds were doing for them, and they sincerely want to make amends for the way they treated them, but by now the nerds are long gone, so there's no way the girls would ever catch up to them. To begin with, they can't make it out of the woods by themselves, and they can't defend themselves from monsters, so how do they intend to find the nerds? He asks them if they have the resolve to do whatever it takes to apologize to the nerds, but the girls break down crying because they know that they'll die in no time if they are left out in the woods by themselves. They plead with Haruka to teach them how to survive out here, and he is so stunned by their sudden request that he ends up agreeing to it without thinking. As a result, Haruka's subjugate ability activates, and all of a sudden, the girls have become his subservient followers. Now all they do is blankly stare at him and finish off monsters whenever Haruka gets into a fight, and then they pull out the magic crystal and present it to him like puppies looking for praise. Haruka really isn't happy with how things are going, but for now, he notices that one of the girls has a small injury on her arm, so he hands her a healing potion he made so she can recover. However, she just uses it on him instead. He's getting really sick of how the girls only do things for his benefit now, and he is really worried about how he's going to explain this to the class rep if he runs into her, and right on cue, the class rep just so happened to be walking through that part of the woods at the moment. Once the class rep gets Haruka's attention, Haruka panics because he doesn't know what to say to her, and come to think of it, he doesn't actually know what her name is. They've been in the same class since elementary school, and the class rep has always been nice to him, so she can't believe he never bothered to learn her name. A few moments later, the rest of the girls from the class show up since everyone aside from the popular girls are following the class rep's orders. Speaking of the popular girls, class rep notices them standing behind Haruka, but they look like they are currently sharing a single brain cell, so class rep thinks Haruka must have done something to them. He would like to say he's innocent, but the fact of the matter is that even if he didn't mean to do it, his skill turned the girls into his servants and he doesn't know what to do about it. He tries his best to explain the situation without making himself seem like the bad guy, but none of the girls actually believe him, so Haruka gives up on trying to prove his innocence and turns to walk away. Unfortunately, class rep forces him to stay while she checks on Shimazaki to make sure she's alright, and luckily, a little shaking is all it took for the subjugation to be undone, so Shimazaki tells class rep that she's alright. Class rep is relieved to hear that, and Haruka thinks that means he can leave now. But class rep still wants to find out how the whole subjugation thing happened in the first place, so she refuses to let Haruka go yet. While the girls are talking, Haruka is left alone by a tree, and since he's got nothing to do, he decides to try practicing his magic so he can expand his house once he gets home. He begins trying to figure out how to make a basement, but he messes it up and accidentally buried himself in the ground from the neck down. He's stuck like that until the class rep finds him, and she is shocked to find him buried in the dirt when she just asked him to wait a few minutes, but boredom can make a guy do crazy things. She goes over Haruka's head to grab him so he can get out of the dirt, and once he is free, she apologizes for not trusting him since Shimazaki told her that he was just trying to help everyone. Haruka doesn't recall ever saying he would help everyone, but class rep and the other girls are already thanking him, so he decides to just go with it. Since everything has been settled, he wants to head back home, but the girls start getting mad because he wants to leave them out in the wilderness without helping at all. Class rep realizes Haruka just mentioned having a home, so she asks him about it, and Haruka explains that he had some spare time on his hands, so he just kind of built a house. Class rep can't believe he managed to build an entire house by himself, while they've been struggling to manage a camp, and the other girls are extremely impressed as well, so they call a meeting and begin talking amongst themselves. Class rep asks how many people Haruka's house can accommodate, and from the way he designed it, it would fit about 200 people, but you have to move some furniture around and empty the indoor pool though. Class rep is really jealous of how well Haruka is doing for himself, and as much as she hates to bother him, she asks if she and the other girls can stay with him for the night since they are all currently homeless. Haruka freaks out because it's one thing to invite guys to stay over for the night, but this is an entire class worth of girls, and he's having a hard time controlling himself. Once he calms down, Haruka begins leading them all to his house, but because of all the time he has spent roaming these woods, Haruka is far better at getting around. One of his skills even gives him helpful pointers to keep him going in the right direction. Eventually, Haruka makes it back to his house with the girls, and after catching their breath, they are stunned by the magnificence of Haruka's house. It's been so long since they've had a roof over their heads or gotten to experience the wonders of indoor plumbing, so as soon as Haruka mentions that there's a bath over in that direction, the girls start frantically running towards it and strip down right there in front of Haruka. There's no way he can handle spending an entire night in the same room with all of them, so he sets up a tent so he can be alone and prepares to go to sleep. Just then, class rep walks into his tent because there's something she wanted to talk to him about. First of all, she thanks him for all his help because she wouldn't have known what to do without him. After the nerds left, the gym bros decided to leave as well, so the girls were all left on their own. It's been tough, but now that they've had a bath and a good meal, the girls are all in high spirits once more. Still, even though the things worked out eventually, class rep feels like she has failed as a representative because she couldn't do anything to help the class's situation by herself. Haruka thinks she's being a little too hard on herself because up till now, she's been the one protecting the girls and kept them together. That may be true, but class rep says they just got lucky because they didn't run into any monsters out there, but if they had, she would have been powerless to protect the class, unlike the nerds. Again, Haruka doesn't think she is being fair to herself because the nerds have practically spent their whole lives preparing for this situation, so it's natural that they would be able to handle themselves well. However, on her end, this was the first time he had ever even heard about isekai, so all things considered, she has been doing pretty well. Class rep feels a lot better after hearing him say she did a good job, although her accomplishments still seem insignificant compared to Haruka, who created a functioning household in just a week. She wishes him a good night and heads back inside, but with everything that happened today, there's no way Haruka is getting any sleep tonight. Early the next morning, Haruka wakes up and finds one of the girls sitting outside his tent and asking him to get up because breakfast is ready. It takes him a minute to realize what's going on, but when he finally does, he freaks out a little and says he actually wants to sleep in a little longer. The girl doesn't accept his answer and crawls on top of him to convince him to get out of bed, so Haruka gives up and asks what's for breakfast. He was expecting the usual mushroom soup with a side of extra mushrooms, but to his surprise, breakfast is actually fish today, and he is so excited that he accidentally headbutts the girl. The girl was slightly hurt, but Haruka couldn't care less because he finally gets to eat something other than mushrooms, and he absolutely loves it. Class rep doesn't understand why he is so excited to be eating fish when he has been living next to the river this entire time, but while that may be true, Haruka simply sucks at fishing, so he has never been able to catch any. For the girls to be so used to eating fish, they must have a reliable method of catching fish, so Haruka asks to see how they do it. Class rep agrees and takes Haruka at the river along with one of the girls who has a lightning magic skill. And as for how she catches fish, she kind of just electrocutes the water until the fish stop being alive. Haruka is really impressed, so he pleads with her to do it one more time. And while the girl doesn't really want to, she agrees anyway since Haruka is helping her out. She spawns another lightning ball, but before she could throw it in the river, Haruka takes the lightning ball and seals it with his packing skill. He then tosses it in the river and is able to catch some fish as well. But on top of that, he also acquired lighting magic, so he won't be needing Lightning Girl's help anymore. Class rep asks what he just did, so Haruka explains that by using his packing skill on a particular element, he can gain that kind of magic. It's probably an effect caused by a combination of his many skills, which is definitely useful, but he still doesn't think it's impressive since he still only has a bunch of useless skills. While the other girls are playing in the river, Haruka sits with class rep and asks what she and the other girls plan to do after this. Class rep says the details still aren't certain yet, but they plan to head for the nearest village to try and catch up with the nerds. However, they are going to need to level up if they plan to make it out of this forest on their own, so Haruka offers to help them train before they leave. A short while later, all the girls are gathered out in the forest, and before Haruka begins his training camp, he says he would like to know what their current levels are. The girls tell him that their levels are all above 15, and Haruka begins feeling depressed because he's still only level 7 after all this time in the forest. He's honestly starting to doubt that the girls even need his help to begin with, so he decides to give them a small test and sets them up to fight a bunch of kobolds to see how well they do. The girls think this will be a piece of cake since the kobolds are only level 6, but a few moments later, they've all had their asses handed to them and are down for the count. The girls had no idea that the kobolds would actually fight back, so they all head back to regroup and think of a new strategy. And for some reason, the strategy meeting is taking place in Haruka's magic tent. They can all fit since Haruka's tent is able to expand, but he still has no idea why they chose to come here. After a little deliberation, the girls head back out and they are sure they won't lose this time. Haruka is glad that they seem motivated, but he honestly doesn't think they'll be able to win this time either. Once they've left, the girl from this morning approaches Haruka and says she wants to apologize for her behavior this morning. She was intentionally getting close to him just to see if he would try to take advantage of the situation if given the chance. She admits that she didn't trust him at first, but he gave them a place to stay, food to eat, and is even helping them learn how to fight, so she feels like she can trust him, and she'll be back to wake him up tomorrow with his breakfast. Haruka is glad she trusts him and says he's looking forward to seeing her tomorrow, although he doesn't know her name, so he's just going to call her Fish Girl. The next morning, Haruka is happy to receive a fish from Fish Girl, but then he hears the other girls talking about going out to fight kobolds again for revenge. But before they can leave, class rep calls them back and says they need to train first because they are definitely going to lose again if they go back to fight now. She suggests they should practice by fighting goblins, but when they actually start a fight against the goblins, it doesn't go well for the girls. Despite this loss, some of the girls still think they are ready to fight the kobolds, although a bunch of them pretend to be sick to avoid having to fight anymore. Haruka doesn't think this is going to end well, so he is prepared to intervene if necessary. However, to his surprise, the girls actually learnt from their mistakes against the goblins and worked together to take down the kobolds. Class rep congratulates them all on their victory, and Haruka is relieved because this means the girls can handle themselves and won't need to stay with him anymore. He believes he can finally get back to his life as a loner, but class rep comes over and thanks him for agreeing to come with them to the nearest village. He knows for a fact he never said he would join them, but class rep is really insistent, so he caves in and agrees to go with her. A little while later, everyone has packed their stuff and they are ready to leave the forest, but Haruka reminds them that they don't know what they might run into out there, so they should all keep their guard up. At the same time, in a different part of the forest, one of the boys from the class is seen running for his life when he makes the mistake of turning around and trips over a rock. He is now cornered by his attacker and has nowhere to run, so he ends up getting strangled to death on the spot. Haruka's top priority right now is ensuring the safety of the girls since the delinquents are sure to come after them, and to do that, he needs to get them out of the forest. A little while later, Haruka runs into a giant orc, and he sees this as a good opportunity to teach the girls how to defend themselves properly, so he tells them to stand back and watch how he handles it. He charges at the orc with his stick, so the orc raises its club and tries to clobber him into the ground, but when it looks down, it realizes our boy isn't there anymore. Haruka is currently hiding behind a tree, and with how slow the orc is, it will never hit him. But if Haruka wants to fight back, he needs to think of a plan. He remembers the nerds telling him that physical attacks aren't effective against orcs, so the safest bet to defeat them is to use a bunch of magic. Haruka pulls up his stat window to check if he has any usable magic, and he's got all the elements at his disposal thanks to his packing skill. But before he gets the chance to use any of them, the orc finds his hiding spot and uses its club to destroy the tree, so Haruka is forced to dodge its strikes until he has finally had enough and appears behind the orc with his stick before knocking it to the ground. It turns out that the orc died from that, and he wasn't expecting that since physical attacks aren't meant to work against this thing. The girls are upset because they didn't actually get to learn anything from him one-shotting the orcs, so Haruka apologizes and says he will use magic to defeat the next one so they can learn. The next time Haruka spots an orc minding its own business, he prepares a flame spell in his hand and just casually chucks it at the orc. As the spell collides with the orc's face, the monster goes down and doesn't get back up again. So the girls are even more upset because they'll never learn to defend themselves if he keeps killing everything instantly. Later that night, the group has a lot of pub meat on hand, so they celebrate with a barbecue. While everyone is having fun though, Haruka is in the back setting up as many traps as he can so they don't get attacked while they sleep. His tent also has properties that prevent detection by enemies, so with this he thinks they'll be alright. Next, he wants to plan out the route they'll be taking tomorrow morning, So he activates his map skill and is checking out the path up ahead when all of a sudden, his perception skill alerts him to the presence of someone nearby, so he goes to investigate. He notices 4 male figures emerging from the dark, so he is worried it might be the delinquents at first, but as the guys approach, he realizes it's just the gym bros, and he is relieved since he won't have to fight them. At the same time, Class Rep was looking for Haruka and notices him talking to 4 guys over in the distance. Even if they aren't hostile, Haruka still wonders what the gym bros are doing out here to begin with. He assumes they must have been after the girls, but the bros adamantly deny it and say they came here looking for Haruka. He decides to believe them, but he still doesn't understand why they were going through all that trouble to avoid the girls though. The bros explain that they can't trust the girls, and they inform him of a skill that was even worse than charm and puppeteer skills that the delinquents wanted to use. Haruka recalls seeing something about a hijack skill, and that's exactly what the gym bros were referring to. The delinquents were really vocal about all the things they wanted to do with their mind control skills, but not once did they mention anything about the hijack skill, so that means they didn't have it. And if the delinquents didn't have it and the nerds didn't have it either, then that means one of the girls must have the skill and is keeping it hidden from everyone. Haruka decides to mess with the bros a little and tells them that he may be the one with the hijack skill, but the bros don't seem that worried. In fact, they seem relieved because they know Haruka is so much of a loner that he would never actively seek out people to hijack their skills. Haruka admits that he doesn't have the hijack skill, although he does have a subjugate skill that can turn people into his pets, but he prefers not to use it. Anyway, the bros just wanted to fill him in on the dangers of the hijack skill, so they say they are heading back into the woods to keep an eye on the delinquents since they seem pretty suspicious. Before they leave, they ask Haruka to apologize to Class Rep and the rest of the girls for them since they ditched them without warning. The next day, everyone gets up and all the girls seem a lot more energetic than normal, so Haruka steps away because all their energy is draining him. As he is walking away, Class Rep comes up behind him and says she has something she wants to tell him. She nervously fidgets about and is about to tell Haruka that she is the one who has the hijack skill, but Haruka already knew about that a long time ago. He has an appraisal skill after all. Class Rep is shocked that he knew since the only people who know about her skill are the nerds. She asks why Haruka didn't say anything before now if he knew and why he still chose to help her, but Haruka simply didn't think it was that big of a deal. She asks if he's not afraid of her because hijack is a skill that allows her to steal another person's skills by killing them, so anyone would be afraid of it. But again, Haruka doesn't think there's anything to be worried about. The nerds probably weren't worried about her having the skill either since they knew about it, and while they sealed the charm and puppeteer skills from the delinquents, they left Class Rep with her hijack skill. That must mean they at least trust her to not abuse it, and the same goes for Haruka, because he knows that there's no way she could ever kill someone. Class Rep is moved to tears after hearing that Haruka trusts her that much, and Haruka thinks it's funny since she's been crying a lot more often over the past few days, but she says it's his fault she has been crying so much. The group continues traveling through the forest, and after they've traveled a considerable distance, Haruka tells everyone they can take a break for now and pulls out a box of juice to sell to the girls. Unfortunately, none of them have any money, so one of the girls offers to pay in some other way if he gives her some juice, but Class Rep puts a stop to that immediately, so the girl doesn't get any juice. After the short break, the group gets moving again, and they are currently ahead of schedule, but it's still going to be dark before they make it to the village, so they'll have to camp outside again. Just then, Haruka notices a river nearby and he thinks this is the perfect opportunity to try something out, so he asks Class Rep to look after the rest of the girls while he goes scouting. She asks if she can come with him, but Haruka wants to do this alone, so he speeds off before she can follow him. While running through the woods, Haruka activates his magic boost skill to reinforce his body, and then he casts weight magic on himself to make himself lighter. With this combination, he is able to move faster than ever before, and with enough force, he believes he should be able to fly, so he gives his theory a test and jumps high into the sky. It looks like it's working at first, but then he starts going back down, and before he knows it, he has crash landed on the forest floor. He nearly died from that fall, so he decides not to try that anymore and heads back to camp. But when Class Rep sees how badly injured he is, she gets really worried and asks what happened. Haruka explains that he launched himself up really high, but then gravity happens, so he kind of fell and nearly died. Class Rep starts yelling at him for doing something so dumb, but if it makes it any better, Haruka did manage to spot some berries while he was up in the sky, so he offers to make some juice for Class Rep, but Class Rep doesn't want any, so Juice Girl comes up to him and starts asking for juice again. The next day, everyone gets moving again and things seem to be going smoothly, aside from the girl that got lost and the orcs that they ran into. But despite these inconveniences, the group still managed to make it out of the woods together. All the girls are ecstatic to finally be out of the forest since the village shouldn't be much farther now, but Haruka is a bit on edge since they are vulnerable out in the open like this. The hills are blocking his views and he can't tell where the village is, so he looks into his stat window to see if there are any skills in there that could help his situation, and to his surprise there's a new airwalk skill. He must have gotten it from his failed attempt at flying yesterday, so he tries it out, and sure enough, he starts walking on air. Class rep notices that Haruka is gone, so she starts looking around for him and is shocked to see him floating in the air. Haruka looks down at her and says he just wants to do some scouting to make sure the road up ahead is safe. He looks out into the distance and things seem pretty peaceful at first, but then he notices a group of villagers being attacked by wolves. He comes back down and tells class rep that he didn't see much aside from a couple of people being attacked by wolves. Class rep thinks they need to go help them, but just because they are being attacked by monsters doesn't mean they are good people. All the girls think they should hurry over to save the people, but at this distance, none of them will make it in time even if they run, and what if the people turn out to be bandits or something? He personally doesn't want to take any risks that would put the group in danger, so he suggests that they should just ignore them and keep going. He begins walking away, but class rep grabs his arm and pleads with him to reconsider. She says that if the people turn out to be bandits and try to attack them, then she will fight them off, but in case they turn out to be good people, she wants to save them. Haruka already knew class rep would be determined to help people even if it puts her in danger, but as things are, the girls still suck at fighting, and there's not much they could do to help even if they went, so Haruka says he will handle it by himself instead. The people are too far away for him to run to, and even if he tries the weight magic from yesterday, he probably still won't make it, so he decides to try something new. He casts the magic boost and weight magic on himself, and as a final touch, he uses a powerful wind spell to act as a propellant. The spell is so powerful that class rep ends up getting caught in it. But Haruka doesn't notice, so he blasts off and is headed straight for the villagers. While using airwalk to keep himself airborne, Haruka notices something tugging on his cape, so he turns around and is shocked to see class rep hanging onto him for dear life. She is terrified and explains that she got sucked in by his wind spell, and they are way too high up for her to let go at this point, so she's tagging along for the ride. As they start getting close to the villagers, class rep tells Haruka to stop, but about that, he never actually thought of a way to stop, so they end up crash landing in the middle of the fight between the villagers and the wolves. As a result, class rep is knocked out, all the wolves are instantly killed, and the people are left in utter disbelief. While class rep is still out cold, the leader of the group thanks Haruka for saving them and introduces himself as Ofter, and his friend is Gatek. If Haruka hadn't shown up, Ofter's entire party may have been wiped out, so he is truly grateful to him. Haruka asks what they are doing out here, so Ofter and Gatek explain that wolves have been attacking merchants out in these plains, so the Adventurers Guild put out a request for the wolves to be exterminated, and they thought they could handle it at first, but they quickly got overwhelmed. Their carriage has been destroyed, so they are going to have to carry everything back to the village by hand, and since there's not much for Haruka to do until the rest of the girls catch up, he decides to share some of the roasted mushrooms he carries on himself for emergencies. Gatek is surprised Haruka would share something like this with them since these are stamina-capped mushrooms and they are extremely rare because they restore a person's stamina almost immediately. The rest of the girls from class soon show up, and they are excited to meet the elf and night ladies in Ofter's party, so they all get along well. Ofter offers to lead them all to the town he came from, so before long the group arrives at the town of Omu, and they are excited to finally be back in civilization. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the delinquents have been leveling up a lot over the past few days, and now that they've got a good amount of experience, they intend to go after the girls and get their revenge. But before they do that, they have to get their puppeteer and charm skills unsealed, so they will going after the nerds first. The girls excitedly run through the city streets while appreciating all the amazing stuff civilization has to offer, but class rep reminds them that they don't have any money, and they've still got a ton of stuff to do. She then runs off to round up all the girls, and Haruka smiles because now that he has successfully helped everyone make it to the city, they shouldn't need him anymore, and that means he can go back to his peaceful loner lifestyle. Class rep is having a hard time getting the girls to behave themselves, so she asks Haruka to help her out a little, but Haruka is already relaxing under the shade since his job is done. She gets upset, and while she understands that he is relieved that they are finally in the city, there's still a lot of stuff they need to do. She blows on her whistle to get all the girls' attention, and once they've all filed in, she goes over the plan she came up with. First, they'll all head over to the Adventurers Guild and sell all the items they collected on their way here. And once they've done that, they will register with the guild and rent a room in an inn for the night. And while they are doing that, they can also ask if anyone has seen the nerds come through here recently. It's a good plan, but the popular girls are offended that class rep is treating the nerds like some unimportant side quest, and class rep apologizes, but Haruka makes fun of the popular girls for caring about the nerds so much. A little while later, the group makes their way to the Adventurers Guild, and it's a lot more intimidating than Haruka had expected. Everyone inside is giving them dirty looks already, and he really doesn't want to head inside, but Offer tells him the guild master wants to meet with him. This sounds like bad news, so Haruka tells class rep to get all the girls registered while he goes to see what the guild master wants. He heads upstairs, and all the people here look even scarier than the ones downstairs, so he's put on edge. He finds Gaytech waiting at the end of the room, and he leads Haruka into the guild master's office, where he comes face to face with this scary-looking man. But it looks like he was worried for nothing because the guild master just wanted to thank him for saving Ofter and his party. After that's done, Haruka heads back downstairs and he notices a counter, so he assumes that's where you go to sell magic stones and heads over and asks the attendant. The attendant confirms that he can sell his magic stones here, so Haruka dumps a bunch of stones out from his bag, and there's a lot more where that came from, but the attendant asks him to stop because he's already dropped 2 days worth of overtime on her desk. So she just asks him to come back tomorrow so she can finish appraisal all of these first. Haruka doesn't mind waiting, and the girls are all done registering as adventurers anyway, so Haruka needs to hurry up and register as well. He proudly walks into the registration room to get himself assessed, but once the assessment is done, the guild worker tells Haruka that he is too weak to become an adventurer. The guild requires people to be at least level 10 before they can register to become adventurers, and even then, you'd have to be in a party to qualify. If Haruka wanted to register as a solo adventurer, he would have to be at least level 20, but he is only level 9 right now, and his loner skill prevents him from forming a party, so he's going to be unemployed for a long time. Later that night, class rep leads everyone to the lodging that the guild prepared for them, but once they finally make it there, Haruka starts freaking out because this place looks a lot like a love hotel, however it isn't, so everyone says goodnight to one another and heads to their separate room. The next morning, they all get up and meet at the diner to get some breakfast, and class rep is excited to tell them that this town is supposedly really safe, so they are free to head into town and do whatever they want. The girls are happy, so they start making plans to go shopping later today, and since they can clearly handle themselves from here on out, Haruka plans to head back into the woods once he gets paid for his crystals. Speaking of which, Haruka heads to the guild after breakfast to see if they are done appraising his magic stones, but when he gets there, he is met with sincere apologies because they don't have enough money on hand to pay him all at once. The guild master comes out as well to personally offer his apologies and asks Haruka if he would be willing to allow the guild to pay him in installments. Haruka says he is fine with it, and the guild master is thankful that he is so understanding. But in the meantime, he tells Haruka he can have the amount for the magic stones they have already appraised. There's 8 million era in that bag, and from what Haruka and class rep have learned since arriving in Omu, the money here pretty much had the same value as money back on Earth, so Haruka just became rich. His payment is so high because he brought in more F-rank stones than the guild has ever seen, and he also defeated those green wolves, so that contributed to the payout. Since he just got a small fortune, Haruka decides to do a little shopping before heading back into the forest, and Galek says he knows a place that Haruka might want to visit. Haruka thinks he is taking him to an adult establishment, but to his disappointment, Galek was just leading him to a rundown weapons shop. This place collects specialty equipment from dungeons, and since Haruka is a bit of a special case, Galek felt like this would be a good place for him to get his equipment. The place may look sketchy, but he assures Haruka that the stuff here is really high quality. Haruka takes Galek's word for it, but he still wants to try out some of the stuff before he buy anything, and the stuff may look weird, but the effects they provide are amazing, so Haruka spends all day looking through the stuff and buys as much of it as he can afford. Just then, he notices a necklace that looks good. The only description his appraisal skill gives is that it fits 7. Come to think of it, Haruka got this same message when he tried to appraise his villager set, so he decides to ask the shopkeeper if he knows what fits 7 is supposed to mean. The shopkeeper explains that in the case of the necklace, is able to combine the effects of up to 7 items and allows the wearer to use them all at once. That sounds really useful to Haruka, and if the effect also applies to his villager set, then that means he can stack even more effects onto his equipment. It's about to begin sorting through all the items for the best effects to combine, but just then, class rep shows up and starts yelling at him for staying out so late. Haruka realizes that he has been here for a while, but he still has a lot more stuff he wants to try out. However, as he is holding one of the items, it suddenly starts reacting, and before he realizes it, all the items in front of him get combined into one. The shopkeeper is understandably pissed because Haruka hasn't actually paid for anything yet, and all the stuff cost him well over 10 million to acquire. Haruka starts panicking because he doesn't have that much money, so Galak pleads with the shopkeeper to accept Haruka's 8 million instead. The next day, Haruka is sulking over the fact that he just wasted all his money, so now he is completely broke. He would like to go outside and gather some more crystals, but people aren't allowed to leave town to hunt monsters unless they are registered as adventurers, and he already tried to sneak out with some of the girls, but class rep caught him and started yelling at him some more, and he has the perfect plan to sneak out without class rep spotting him. His villager cloak was combined with an invisibility cloak, so with this, he should be able to make it out of the city unnoticed. He sneakily walks past class rep and the other girls, and he feels bad for leaving them without saying anything. A class rep would definitely try to stop him if she found out. Haruka manages to successfully escape the lodging, and once he's outside, he makes the misguided decision to take off his invisibility cloak, so as he attempts to jump over the wall, he gets spotted by a couple of the girls that were outside, and they ask him where he's going, so Haruka freaks out and accidentally smashes his family jewels against the wall. He falls back to the ground and yells at the girls for startling him like that, but they say that he just wanted to know why he was jumping over the wall. Haruka recognizes the girls as part of the athletic group, but one of them is missing, so he uses his perception skill to locate her. And to his horror, he discovers that she is about to strip naked in the middle of the street. Haruka and the athletic girls all rush over to stop her, but even though they manage to get to her before she could completely undress, Haruka's escape plans have been ruined. The next day, all the girls are heading out to complete a quest for the guild, and Haruka asks if they will let him join them. A class rep refuses because she doesn't trust him after he tried to ditch the crew yesterday. She assures him that they will be back in no time, and Haruka says he will wait. But as soon as class rep and the others have left, he starts smiling because he has no intention of waiting for them. He has learned from his mistake yesterday, so he keeps his cloak on and waits until he is outside the city gates before he takes it off. He has officially made it out of the city, and nothing is stopping him from making it back to his house in the forest, but as he is running, he notices a bunch of destroyed buildings over in the distance. Normally, this would be a long side quest, but Haruka just wants to get back to his house, so he completely ignores it. He also sees a horde of goblins, which would be a great source of experience if he took the time to slaughter them. But once again, he just wants to head back to the forest. Now this time, as he is running, he notices a carriage being attacked by bandits. And this is pretty hard to ignore, especially since the people inside are asking for his help, but ultimately, he decides to just ignore it and keep moving. However, as he's trying to leave, the bandits attack him, so he tries to explain to them that he doesn't want to get involved. The bandits refuse to leave him alone though, so he is forced to take action and absolutely roasts them with a single fire spell. The staff Haruka is holding is a result of one of the items combination he got stuck with, and it turns out that it's pretty powerful. As the bandits get back up, Haruka once again tries to talk his way out of the fight, so he tells the bandits that they should just leave him alone if they know what's good for them. The bandits admit that Haruka's magic is powerful, but since they assume magic is the only thing he's good at, they all decide to attack him in close quarters. However, Haruka is easily able to knock them down with one strike each. The bandits can't believe they are losing to a single kid, so they ask what Haruka's job is. He is still unemployed, so that question stings a lot. The bandits decide to check Haruka's status so they know what they are up against, but as soon as they see that he is only level 9, they decide that they can beat him if they use their weapon skills, even though they've been losing so far. Weapon skills are only available from level 20, so Haruka doesn't have any, and from what he knows, weapon skills are really powerful, so he's a little worried. The bandits begin using their weapon skills, but while it is certainly dangerous, they keep yelling out their attack before they use it, so Haruka is easily able to dodge until they all pass out from exhaustion. Just then, he notices a girl approaching him from behind, and this is the last thing he wanted because this looks like an unskippable side quest. The girl's name is Marielle, and she's from a noble family, so she wants to thank Haruka for helping her, but now that she thinks about it, Haruka did try to ignore her at first, so she's not sure if she should be thanking him. Regardless of his initial intentions, she still really appreciates him stopping to help her, and she has a favor to ask of him. Her father is the lord of a certain city, and she was hoping Haruka would accompany her back to the city since she fears for her safety. Haruka doesn't want to at first, but she mentions something about rewarding him for his help, so he decides to go with her after all. Along the way, Marielle asks him where he was coming from when he met her, so Haruka begins ranting about the shitty city he just came from. Because the guild didn't have enough money to pay him, they refused to register him as an adventurer, and the city wouldn't even let him leave without a permit. By now, Mariel realizes which city he is talking about, and she begins crying because she hadn't realized how little Haruka thought of the city her father runs. After seeing her reaction, Haruka realizes that she is the daughter of the Lord of Omiyu, and that means this carriage is heading back there, so he really regrets agreeing to escort her. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the gym bros and the delinquents are squaring up for a battle because the gym bros refuse to let the delinquents do anything bad to the girls, and the delinquent leader has no problem with murdering the gym bros if he has to, but as he raises his sword, he gets stabbed through the back. Both the gym bros and the delinquents are shocked to see this, but as the rest of the delinquents try to avenge their friend, the first one to attack just gets stabbed as well. The last two decide to strike at the same time for better odds of winning, but the unknown attacker is easily able to take them down as well. After seeing this, the gym bros realize they are outmatched, so they attempt to run away, but the assailant is too quick for them to escape, so he appears in front of them and begins menacingly walking forward. Meanwhile, Haruka has just been dragged back to town by Mariel, and he really didn't want to come, but Mariel started crying, so he decided to go with her just to be nice. Once he arrives at the Lord's house, Mariel leaves him alone for a minute, so he takes a look around. And it certainly looks like a nice house, but that has nothing to do with Haruka, so he immediately starts heading for the front door so he can leave. However, before he can do that, Mariel gets back and she's upset that he's trying to leave because she specifically asked him to wait while she changed her clothes. She tells him to just wait a little longer because she still has to do something to thank him, and Haruka doesn't want to, but since she is so insistent, has no choice but to listen. He may have been against staying here at first, but once Mariel shows him the feast she had prepared for him, he completely changed his attitude. Mariel did this as her way of showing Haruka some appreciation, but she's starting to get annoyed because Haruka is totally ignoring her. While he's stuffing his face with food, Mariel asks one of her maids to bring the rest of Haruka's reward, so a pouch of money is brought, and while Haruka acknowledges it, he doesn't seem all that excited. As a bonus, Mariel noticed that Haruka isn't registered with the city, so she went through the liberty of getting a custom ID card made for him which will grant him permission to leave and enter the city anytime he wants. That's a really cool gift, but Haruka stopped paying attention after he received the money and has been much more focused on the dessert that was brought to him. The next day, class rep and the rest of the girls begin questioning Haruka about what happened last night. Haruka explains to them that he was just summoned to the local lord's mansion, and while class rep knows he isn't lying, she doesn't understand why the local lord would want to see Haruka in the first place. Haruka chooses to keep his explanation vague so they don't find out about how he met Mariel during his failed escape attempt. Eventually, the girls let it go and decide to go out on a mission. But before they leave, class rep reminds Haruka that he's not allowed to leave town, and Haruka seems oddly compliant this time. But that's just because he knows there's nothing stopping him from leaving town once the girls leave. With his custom ID, he can finally get out of town without any hassle, but before he goes, there are a few things he has to do first. He uses his money to buy some new equipment, eats as much good food as possible, and then starts writing a note for the class rep to find so she won't get mad about him leaving. He writes down that he's going back to the forest to check on the gym bros, and while he's just writing it as an excuse, he really is worried about those muscle heads. He heads outside, and after presenting his ID, he is allowed to leave town, and this time he won't let himself get distracted by any annoying side quests. Before long, Haruka returns to the woods, and he's glad to see that everything is still the same as it was when he left it. He can't wait to get back to his house, but while he's not paying attention, the orc sneaks up and attempts to smash his head in. Fortunately, Haruka's stats are way too high for something like that to work on him, so he just one-shots the orc with his staff. He finds it weird that an orc would appear around here since they are usually only found a lot deeper in the forest, and that's not the only strange thing he discovers because he finds a human blood trail nearby. He knows the blood couldn't have come from the nerds since they are too strong to lose to anything in the forest, so he assumes it must have come from one of the gym bros. He begins tracking the blood trail until he eventually finds the gym bros all bloody and bruised under a tree. At first he thinks they are dead, but once he gets closer, he realizes they are still breathing, so he dumps every healing potion in his inventory on them until they eventually regain consciousness. They begin explaining everything to Haruka, and while Haruka had initially thought the jocks were attacked by the delinquents, he is shocked to be told that all the delinquents are actually dead. Haruka asks if the nerds were targeted as well, but the jocks have no idea, although it doesn't seem likely since the nerds left the forest a long time ago. They can tell that Haruka intends to go after the person who did this, so they warn him that Tanaka is insanely strong now, so much so that they barely lasted a couple of seconds against him. Plus, he stole all their overpowered weapons, so now he's even stronger than he was before. They think he must have been planning this whole thing from the moment the class got teleported here, and they don't know if they'll be able to stop him, but they know who his next target is going to be. Of all the students left alive, the most likely target is going to be Class Rep since she has the hijack skill. Haruka certainly thinks it's possible that Tanaka will go after her for her hijack skill, but the only people who knew about the skill were Class Rep, the nerds, and Haruka, so he wonders how the info got out. The jocks were only able to figure it out because Tanaka kept asking for Class Rep's location, and when they couldn't give him the info he wanted, he beat them up within an inch of their lives. They didn't want to go looking for Class Rep since that would put her in danger, so they came to the area around Haruka's house in hopes that he would find them before they died. With how strong he is, they are sure they'll be able to win if they all fight together, but Haruka doesn't know if he really wants to get involved in a battle like this in the first place. He specifically wanted to avoid side quests, but if Class Rep is being targeted, he has no choice but to put a stop to it. However, he makes it clear to the jocks that this is a battle that he will be fighting alone. The jocks try to talk him out of it since going alone is insanely risky, but when they see the look in his eyes, they realize he is serious about it, so they agree to let him go alone. Haruka tells them they should just head to town in the meantime and meet up with the rest of the girls, and while they are there, they had better apologize to Class Rep for ditching the group earlier. As the jocks leave, Haruka thinks to himself that it might have been beneficial to have them fight with him, but he can't risk having all of them fight at once since if Tanaka manages to overpower them, there would be no one left to warn the girls. The safest option is for him to tackle this alone and to make sure he's ready for the battle when he eventually faces Tanaka. At the same time, back at the village, Class Rep is worried sick after realizing that Haruka has left the city. The other girls tell her there's nothing to be worried about since Haruka will definitely come back. Back in the forest, Haruka is thinking over his game plan against Tanaka because the jocks told him that Tanaka has incredibly powerful weapon skills. Even the weapon skills of no-name bandits are frightening, but something Haruka learned after dealing with them is that a weapon skill animation can't be cancelled for it is started, so if Tanaka tries to use a weapon skill on him, he will have to try and take advantage of that weakness. To do that, he wants to try getting himself a new skill, but that means he's going to have to level up. Just then, Haruka notices a bunch of goblins that were attracted by the blood of the jocks, and these ones are pretty high level, so he takes them all out for experience. However, he is still unable to level up. He wishes he could go up against something stronger so he can get more experience points, and just as he says this, a Goblin King shows up, so gets ready to take it down. The Goblin King is strong and its attacks are also really fast, but Haruka is able to jump out of the way at the last second. A single strike from this thing would be fatal, and Haruka doesn't have the time to counterattack without getting hit, so he's forced to come up with a new strategy. He uses his warp skill to combine a bunch of his other skills into a brand new one, and with this new skill, he's able to dash past the Goblin King and defeat it in an instant. He's really glad to see that his idea to combine different skills worked out so well, but in the middle of his celebration, a terrifying presence appears behind him, so he's forced to fall back and prepare for another fight. This monster is a Goblin Emperor, and it's already at level 50 while Haruka is still only level 9, so he doesn't think there's any way he can beat this thing if he fights it head-on. His only option is to try out his combined skill again, so he activates it and charges straight at the Goblin Emperor. The second he is within range, Haruka strikes at it, but his special skills do absolutely nothing to hurt it. The Goblin Emperor gets back up as if nothing happened, and then it starts striking at Haruka with incredible speed. It's clear that the Goblin Emperor is using weapon skills since its attacks are way too powerful, so Haruka looks for an opening in the attack animations so he can launch a counterattack. He manages to find the opening and strikes the goblin in the chest, sending it flying backwards. But even though he did a considerable amount of damage to it, the goblin begins healing itself. If regular attacks aren't going to get him anywhere in this battle, Haruka thinks he's going to have to make up another combined skill. But before he can do that, the Goblin Emperor uses one of his weapon skills and launches powerful slashes at Haruka. Haruka barely manages to block the attack, and with all these injuries, his chances of winning aren't looking good, but he has to keep going if he wants to become strong enough to protect his friends. He gets back up and charges at the Goblin Emperor in a desperate attempt to defeat it. And by the time morning comes, Haruka is the last one standing, and because of his efforts, he's gained 2 levels. Now that he is level 11, Haruka heads back to his house to check out his status window. Just as he expected, his new level has granted him several new skills, but he's not sure if it will be enough for him to beat Tanaka in a fight. Still, with his made-up skill, he is able to attack in a split second to take advantage of the weapon skill animation, so he's just going to have to hope things work out in his favor. Later that evening, outside Haruka's house, Tanaka shows up, and Haruka has been waiting for him. Haruka remembers Tanaka being bullied by the jocks when they first got here, but it turns out he was just playing along so he could get his revenge in the end. While Tanaka and Haruka face off, the girls have just returned to Onui after a long day of adventuring, and as they walk back, they notice a couple of guys sitting outside the walls. They soon realize that it's the jocks, and they are glad to see them, but they are also really worried because the jocks are in pretty bad shape. Class rep remembers Haruka saying he was going to check on the jocks in his note, so she asks them if they know where he is, so they tell her that Haruka is currently fighting in the woods to protect them all. Back in the woods, Tanaka is disappointed to learn that Haruka is the only one here since he was hoping to class rep instead. He even went through all the trouble of getting the delinquents to cause trouble and split up the class. Haruka realizes Tanaka has been behind everything so far, and Tanaka intends to kill as many people as it takes to get what he wants, but he doesn't see Haruka as much of a threat, so he decides to leave the loser alone and go looking for class rep so he can steal her hijack skill. However, even if he doesn't particularly like his classmates, he still wants to protect them, so he holds his staff up to Tanaka's neck and says, "You shall not pass." Tanaka is annoyed that a nobody like Haruka is standing in his way, but he is more than willing to kill him if Haruka wants to ruin his plans. Tanaka creates a shockwave and launches at Haruka, so Haruka raises his hands to defend himself. Before he left the White Room, Tanaka saw that there were only trash skills left on the skill board, so even if he doesn't exactly know what skills Haruka has, Tanaka is sure he must be superior to someone like him. Tanaka then uses his magic to conjure and launch several rocks at Haruka, but as Haruka tries to defend himself again, Tanaka uses a metal skill to hinder his movements, so Haruka is frozen in place for a second and just barely able to dodge out of the way before the rocks could crush him. Even though he can still move, he is a lot slower than normal as a result of Tanaka's skill, and Tanaka intends to take full advantage of Haruka's debuff, so he begins spawning crystal spikes beneath him. Haruka manages to evade all the spikes by jumping side to side, but he won't be able to keep this up for much longer. Tanaka commends Haruka for surviving this long against him, but before he finishes Haruka off, he has one question he wants to ask. He wants to know when Haruka first started suspecting him of being up to no good, and Haruka tells him that he has been suspicious from the very start because there had to have been a reason why Tanaka was sticking around the delinquents back then. Tanaka is impressed that Haruka's instincts were spot on, but now Haruka has a question he wants to ask as well. He wants to know when Tanaka began plotting his despicable plan, and Tanaka proudly states that he has been planning this out from the very beginning. It was a bit of a setback when he realized that class rep had gotten the hijack skill instead of him. But once he got his metal skill, a skill that allows him to interfere with the movements of others to an extent, he knew he could still come out on top if he played his cards right. Just then, he uses magic roots to bind Haruka to the ground. And while he is stuck in place, Tanaka launches a massive fireball to burn him to ash. Tanaka believed this would be enough to kill Haruka, but to his surprise, Haruka absorbs the magic and emerges unharmed. Haruka wasn't sure that would work when he tried it, but he's glad he got that magic-absorbing vine fused into his staff. Now, while Tanaka is still frozen in surprise, Haruka goes on the offensive and charges at him. However, just before Haruka could land a decisive blow, Tanaka summons a sword to block it. Sure, he was surprised that Haruka managed to block his fire magic, but magic isn't his only means of attacking. In fact, he has so many weapons at his disposal that he's having a hard time deciding which weapon he should use to kill Haruka. For fun, he decides that he will just use them all to shred Haruka to pieces and charges forward to attack. Haruka tries his best to defend himself, but with all the different attacks patterns Tanaka is using, he's unable to keep track of him. Eventually, Haruka gets caught off guard and is knocked backwards into some bushes, and by the time he gets up, Tanaka lands a devastating slash that sends Haruka flying across the forest floor. Haruka survives the slash, but he's out of breath and struggling to get back up. Tanaka soon catches up to him and stands over Haruka's body with a smug look on his face, and as much as Haruka doesn't want to admit it, he might be cooked. Tanaka has too many different attack patterns, and on top of that, he has been using a lot of different skills, so Haruka assumes Tanaka must have copied the skills of all their classmates using the copycat skill. Tanaka is surprised that Haruka managed to figure it out so quickly, and since Tanaka admitted to it, Haruka deduces that he must be after class rep because he wants to copy her hijack skill and use it to steal all the original skills. And once he has stolen all the overpowered skills, he will become the most overpowered person in this world. Tanaka begins attacking Haruka again with a scythe this time, and Haruka is knocked back by the power of his strike. Haruka won't be able to handle much more of this, so he tries to launch an attack of his own to catch Tanaka off guard. But as he strikes, it turns out that Tanaka just used illusion magic to trick him. After seeing that nothing he does will work against Tanaka, Haruka seemingly gives up and stands still while Tanaka charges at him with a sword. But at the last second, he says psych and dodges the sword while whispering in Tanaka's ear that he's figured out his secret. Tanaka is no longer able to easily land hits on Haruka, and Haruka explains that he was intentionally letting Tanaka unleash all the attacks he had at his disposal so he could find a weakness. And while Tanaka was attacking, Haruka noticed that he never used the same skill more than twice for some reason. And from that, he deduced that there must be a limit to how many times Tanaka can use his copied skills, so if he just keeps dodging long enough, Tanaka is going to run out of skills to use. Tanaka is a bit panicked that Haruka was able to figure out his weakness, but he still believes he can take Haruka down before he runs out of skills. However, as he tries to strike Haruka is easily able to leap over him and counterattack him. Haruka has gotten used to Tanaka's speed, so no matter how many different skills Tanaka throws at him, Haruka won't be caught off guard anymore. Haruka charges at Tanaka to land a finishing blow while he's still disoriented, but he is forced to back off when Tanaka suddenly fires a laser beam at him. Even if Haruka knows Tanaka's secret weakness, he is still overpowered, so he shouldn't be underestimated in the slightest. Tanaka is starting to show signs of exhaustion, but he gets back to his feet and yells that he will never allow himself to lose to the likes of Haruka. He may be at a disadvantage now, but he's still got one trick up his sleeve, so he starts darting around the forest to overwhelm Haruka. His movements are so unpredictable that Haruka has a hard time keeping up with him, but by the time he finally figures out what Tanaka is up to, it's already too late as Tanaka has already cast his death skill on Haruka. Once the skill takes effect, Haruka falls over and Tanaka begins laughing over his body because he has finally triumphed. To Haruka's credit, Tanaka says he was forced to use up almost all of his saved skills, but it doesn't matter since once he kills his classmates and claims the hijack skill for himself, he can get as many permanent skills as he wants. He then kicks Haruka's head and begins walking away, but as he is leaving, Haruka speaks up and says it's rude to step on someone's head without apologizing. Tanaka can't believe Haruka is still alive because the death skill has a 100% success rate on people who are over level 11, but Haruka has a skill that makes him resistant to negative status effects, plus Haruka rolled double M's when he first got here, so his luck stat is maxed out, which is probably why the death effect didn't work on him. He just fell to the ground for dramatic effect since he thought it would be funny. Tanaka doesn't see the humor in any of this and questions how Haruka is even able to move in the first place since Tanaka used metal to restrict his movements from the very start of the fight. Haruka admits that the metal skill is really troublesome, and in reality, Haruka hasn't been able to move his body at all since Tanaka used that skill on him. But he happens to have a puppet skill, so he has been using that to control his body from the outside this entire time. All the skills Haruka acquired may seem useless on the surface, but in his hands they become insanely powerful. Tanaka refuses to accept that he is losing to someone with nothing but trash skills, so he begins slashing erratically at Haruka, but Haruka easily swats the slashes away and warns Tanaka that he's going to run out of skills if he keeps this up. Tanaka refuses to listen and tries hitting Haruka with an overhead slash, but as expected, Haruka walks out completely unharmed and tells Tanaka that his reign of terror has come to an end. Tanaka doesn't understand how this could happen to a genius like him since he had perfectly calculated everything to make sure he would come out on top. No matter what, 1 + 1 always adds up to 2, so according to his math, Haruka should never have been able to become this strong. Haruka tells Tanaka that his way of thinking is very naive because sure, math made sense when they were back on Earth, but the laws of physics don't apply here. Tanaka has always been a genius when it came to school, so he was constantly bored out of his mind and surrounded by his idiotic classmates. He wished there was a way to put an end to his monotonous school life, and his prayers were answered when the class got summoned to this world. As soon as he saw the skill board, he quickly did some calculations to figure out what the most exciting way to live his new life would be, and he came to the conclusion that he had to kill all his classmates and take their skills for himself. So no matter how psychopathic that may make him sound, he refuses to let a nobody like Haruka get in the way of his plan. Tanaka continues attacking with the rest of his skills, but by now he has to be running low on options, so Haruka thinks he might be able to take advantage of that and finally finish Tanaka off. But just as he was about to land the killing blow, a sword stabs his shoulder from behind, and Tanaka reveals that he can control weapons from a distance as well. With Haruka bleeding and on his knees, Tanaka begins slashing away at him with the sword and claims victory is finally his for the taking. But then Haruka bitch smacks him with his staff and knocks Tanaka away. Tanaka may have created an elaborate plan to ensure his victory, but that's all he had going for him. His copy skill was overpowered from the start, so he never had to put any effort into learning to adapt like Haruka did, and that's why he's going to lose. Tanaka desperately tries to stab Haruka with his sword skill, but Haruka is way ahead of him and takes him out with his made-up skill. With this, Tanaka is fatally wounded and falls over dead, but even though Haruka ended up winning this battle, he was still badly wounded in the process, and all the pain came rushing back to him the second he relaxed. On top of that, all the skills he used during the fight have left him completely drained, so he is on the verge of passing out. However, just before he hits the ground, Haruka is caught by the nerds. He's glad to see them, but he really wishes they had shown up a lot sooner so they could help him with the fight. They may have missed all the fighting, but they are here to help now. Haruka is grateful for the help, but he wonders how they even knew he was out here. So they explain that class rep found them just as they were leaving the dungeon, so she told them all about the fight Haruka was in, and they couldn't just stand by and let him handle it all by themselves, so they took off ahead into the woods to help him. Eventually, they all make it back to the city, and all the girls are out standing by the gate to greet Haruka. They are all really worried about him and say they have a feast prepared in his honor, but all the attention is making Haruka feel really awkward. Just then, the leader of the gym bros comes out to see Haruka, but as a bro, he doesn't need any words and just daps Haruka up in celebration of his victory. Now that that's done, the girls suggest that they all head back to the inn since the baths are ready and they could all use a good scrub down. So they drag Haruka off. Meanwhile, the popular girls stay behind and finally apologize to the nerds like they've been meaning to do. The nerds are surprised by this since they never would have expected these girls to show such humility, but they've come to understand they were wrong for how they treated the nerds and they really appreciate everything they did for the group. It looks like all the story arcs have been wrapped up quite nicely, so Haruka believes there's no need for him to stay here any longer, so he begins slinking away to return to his life in the woods. However, before he could get away, class rep spots him and asks where he thinks he's going. She was so worried that he might end up dead from his fight, and now that he's finally back, he's trying to leave again. Haruka apologizes, so class rep says it's fine as long as Haruka doesn't try to ditch them again, and this time all the girls will be watching him, so there's no way he's getting away from them again. The next day, Haruka wakes up after having a strange dream and heads downstairs where he is greeted by the nerds. From the looks of it, they are going to head into the dungeon again today, and Haruka is a bit curious since they've been dungeon diving a lot lately. The nerds admit that there's a particularly rare item they are looking for, and it only drops in the dungeon, which is why they've been so busy lately. Haruka asks them about what the item does, and basically it's gonna get them their own harem. The nerds have been here for almost a month, and not a single baddie has come their way, so they're going to use the harem raid to fix that. They head off on their adventure, and while a harem raid definitely sounds cool, Haruka has no need for one since he just wants to get back to living his life as a loner. Unfortunately, there's one person standing in the way of that, and she seems really mad for some reason. Haruka freezes in his tracks and asks class rep what she's mad about. He already got yelled at by all the girls yesterday, but class rep hasn't gotten the chance to personally yell at him yet. She begins yelling at Haruka for doing something so dangerous and not taking her with him, completely ignoring the fact that she was Tanaka's target to begin with. Haruka just apologized to get this over with and agrees to inform her the next time he plans on risking his life. Class rep seems satisfied after he says this, so she turns and begins walking away, and Haruka is left on the floor wondering how things got to this point. If he doesn't figure something out soon, he's never going to be able to get back to his loner lifestyle in the woods, but that's when he comes up with an amazing idea. If he hits all the girls with a harem ray, they'll all like him too much to get mad at him. And if they won't get mad, he'd be free to leave. With that, he has made up his mind and plans to head into the dungeon today. At the same time, in the Lord's mansion, Mariel is a little worried because her father has been overworking himself recently. She tries to get him to relax with some tea, but he can't afford to relax just yet, as there have been several sightings of monsters in the area, and it is leading to a fall in merchant activities all over the town. So as the Lord, he has to do something about it. Just then, a guard runs into the room and he's got really bad news to deliver. A horde of monsters has just appeared near the dungeon. Coincidentally, Haruka happened to run into this horde of monsters, and while he wasn't expecting to have to fight anything before getting to the dungeon, he's always up for a quick warm-up. Of course, Mariel has no idea Haruka is already fighting the monsters, so she rushes over to the guild in a panic and tells the guild master that a huge horse of orcs is heading this way, and if nothing is done, it will surely destroy the entire town. Upon hearing this, the entire guild springs into action, and since class rep is there as well, she offers to help defend the town as well. So she rushes off to gather all her classmates, and that's when she realizes that Haruka isn't here. As Haruka charges at the horde, he's a bit surprised to see so many of them, and there's even an orc king here too. But it's not like it makes much of a difference to him, since he can still one-shot them all. Back in town, all the adventurers in the city assemble at the gate, expecting to have the fight of their lives, but all the monsters that were heading their way have already been dispatched, and Haruka has just finished wiping the Orc King off the face of the earth. Now that he's done with that, he takes a moment to think, since it's pretty strange that this many orcs showed up at once, but at the same time he doesn't really care, so he decides to forget about it and continues heading for the dungeon. He eventually locates the dungeon building and sneaks past the guard to get in without having any human interaction. Once he's inside, Haruka is amazed by how detailed the dungeon interior is, but he can't afford to let himself get distracted because he's got a very important mission to complete. He begins looking for the Harem Ray, but he doesn't really know what it looks like, so he just wanders aimlessly until he comes across a random treasure chest in the middle of the hall. He's really excited and opens it expecting to find some really cool items, but to his dismay, after using his appraisal skill to check their stats, he finds out that everything in the chest is a piece of junk. He keeps going through the dungeon and finds more stuff, but it's all just junk as well, so Haruka eventually gives up on trying to find the Harem Ray on his own and decides to ask that weird merchant if he knows anything about it once he gets back to town. Back at the town, everyone has been standing at the gate for hours now waiting for the orcs to attack, and they are starting to think Mariel might have been lying, but all of a sudden, they see something coming from the smoke. So they ready their weapons, but it turns out that it's just Haruka, who's sleepy from a long day of adventuring. Haruka has no idea what's going on here or why everyone looks so tense, so class rep runs up to him and tells him about the horde of monsters that are heading for this village. She also asks him where he has been all this time, but Haruka can't exactly tell her that he's looking for a Harem Ray, so he just remains silent. Gatek asks Haruka if he saw any orcs on his way back here, and now that he mentions it, Haruka remembers slaughtering a horde of orcs earlier today, and for some reason, everyone is angry at him for it. Both the guild master and Mariel say they are thankful that he defeated the orcs, but they can't approve of him doing something as dangerous as fighting a horde of monsters by himself. The guild master tells him that there have been reports of increased monster activity, including monsters making their way out of the dungeon. So there's a serious possibility that they may experience a dungeon stampede in the near future, and that's why he wants Haruka to promise that he won't do anything reckless anymore. Once Haruka is back in his room, he thinks about everything that happened today, and now that he's got the guild master and Mariel on his case as well, it's going to be even harder for him to get out of town without someone nagging him about it. The next day, he heads over to the magic item merchant, and the guy is not happy to see Haruka at all after what he did last time, but Haruka assures him that he's not here for magic items today. All he wants to do is ask a question. He asks where he can find the Harem Ray, and while the merchant doesn't know of any Harem Rays, he does know about the Rize ring that boosts your charisma. That sounds exactly like the kind of thing Haruka is looking for, so he asks the merchant where it's located since it's not anywhere on the first floor of the dungeon. The merchant tells him there's no way an item like that would be on the first floor to begin with because someone would have already picked it up. It must be somewhere around the 50th floor of the dungeon, which no one has ever explored. There are 100 floors in total, but it's not a simple task to descend these floors since you must defeat each floor boss as you go. There's still a lot of stuff that remains unknown about the dungeon, but if Haruka intends to go down there, the merchant tells him that he's going to have to stock up on potions and recovery items, so Haruka runs off to do just that. But all the while the nerds were listening in on Haruka's conversation, and as soon as they learn that he's after the Rize ring, they immediately go to class rep to snitch on Haruka. Once class rep finds out about the Rize ring, she and the other girls get really worried because if Haruka ends up with something like that, they'll like him too much to say no to him, and then he'd be able to do whatever he wants. No matter what, they have to make sure Haruka doesn't get that ring, so they all set out to stop him. After stocking up on supplies, Haruka was on his way to the dungeon, but all of a sudden, his perception alerted him to the presence of several people behind him, so he turned around and found class rep and the entire class pulling up on him. He stops and asks class rep what everyone is doing here, but class rep counters and asks him what he's doing here today. She tells him she knows he is after the Rize ring, but Haruka denies it and makes up a lie, saying he's actually after the tree's ring, a ring that would allow him to talk to animals. Yeah, no one is buying that, and since he's not going to be able to convince them to leave him alone, he just makes a run for it. Class Rep and the rest of the class follow him into the dungeon, and you may be ahead of them. But if Class Rep gets the Rize Ring before him, she would be able to force Haruka to obey her rules, and that would be really bad for his loner lifestyle. So he starts sprinting again to create more distance. Class Rep calls out to him and says it's dangerous to run in the dungeon since he may fall into a trap, but Haruka says traps won't work on him since his luck stat is maxed out. Traps may not work, but poor construction is another thing entirely, because when Haruka puts his hand on the wall, it collapses, sending him falling into a near-bottomless chasm. Class Rep tries reaching her hand out to save him, but she's too late, so Haruka continues falling to his doom. He has been falling for a good minute so far, and I guess he forgot he has the airwalk skill because he doesn't know how to save himself. Eventually, he catches sight of the bottom of the pit, and that's when he comes up with an idea, so he uses earth magic to turn the ground into a cushion and break his fall. With how long he was falling, Haruka wonders if he somehow ended up on the 100th floor, and it looks like there's only one path to follow, but he already knows that tunnel would lead him to the dungeon's final boss, and he doesn't want to deal with that, so he starts thinking of ways to get out of here. He recalls that he has the airwalk skill, and decides to use that to get out of here, but unfortunately, with how deep he fell, airwalk won't be able to get him out. He's got no choice left but to head down the ominous path, but on the bright side, falling into that trap and ending up in an unfamiliar part of the dungeon allowed him to unlock 2 new skills: trap detection and spatial awareness. He uses the skills to scope out the area, and thankfully, there are no traps on the way to the boss's room, but he finds something even worse because it looks like he's actually on floor 101. So that means he has to fight the hidden boss, and that's going to be an extra hassle. Still, it's not like he has much of a choice in the matter, so he begins making his way through the hall. The mana in the air is so dense that he's having trouble breathing, but eventually he arrives at the boss's room and opens the door. As soon as he does this, a wave of mana rushes toward him, and he comes face to face with the secret boss of the Dungeon Emperor. He knows this is going to be a tough battle, so he uses his appraisal skill on it to see what he's up against, and to his horror, he discovers that the Dungeon Emperor is level 100. Meanwhile, Class Rep and the rest of the class have been descending the dungeon in search of Haruka, but they've already reached the 47th floor and there's still no sign of him. The class is worried that he may have fallen to the bottom of the dungeon, but Shimazaki thinks Haruka could just use one of the portals that lead back up to the surface to escape. Unfortunately, Oda explains that the portal only appears after you clear the floor boss, and they don't show at all if you skip the normal path, so there's no chance of Haruka finding one. Everyone knows that Haruka is tough, but the legend of this dungeon says that the Dungeon Emperor lies at the bottom, and even the Dungeon King is nothing compared to the Dungeon Emperor. The girls are starting to worry that they might be ill-prepared to rescue Haruka since they don't have the equipment needed for such a deep dungeon dive, but Class Rep doesn't want to leave him down there, so everyone decides to keep moving forward and make it down as far as they can. Meanwhile, down in the boss room, Haruka is weighing his options for fighting this thing. He appraised it, but he still can't see any of its skills, and the only info that shows up is the fact that this thing is the No-Life King. Haruka knows liches are extremely powerful when it comes to using magic, meaning he can't afford to get into a ranged attack battle, so instead he decides to attack it up close. He flash steps behind the lich, and he thinks he has the upper hand, but at the last second, the lich counters him with its sword, so this fight isn't going to be as easy as Haruka thought it would be. Outside the dungeon, Mariel and her father see dark clouds gather over the dungeon, and they know this must mean something really bad is going to happen. So her father tells her to go to the guild and instruct them to prepare in case of any emergencies that may arise. Back on Haruka's end, he is still thinking of a way to beat the Dungeon Emperor's godlike speed, so he decides to use all of his speed boosting abilities at once to gain the upper hand. He starts running in darts all across the room with the Emperor, but when he strikes, he is still a step too slow, so he has to try to go even faster. He keeps striking at the Emperor and refining his movements as he goes, but nothing he has tried so far has allowed him to gain the edge over the Emperor, and he is just barely avoiding the Emperor's death blows, so he can't keep going for much longer. Due to the intense battle, Haruka's contact lenses unlocked a new ability of foresight, so Haruka is now able to see flashes of the future, but even with a foresight warning, if he lets his guard down for even a second, Haruka is going to die. He doesn't have many options here, so he resolves to just keep attacking like his life depends on it, because it does. After the fight has dragged on for quite a while, Haruka is starting to have fun, but at the same time, his body is not having fun because his knees give out and he starts panting heavily. All this fighting has completely drained his stamina and magic reserves, so he is on the verge of losing consciousness. Meanwhile, the Dungeon Emperor looks like it's just getting started. Haruka forces himself to get back on his feet, but he can barely move, so if the Emperor attacks him now, he's done for. Only the Emperor isn't actually attacking him anymore. Haruka knew from the start the Dungeon Emperor was no ordinary monster, but now that he thinks about it, doesn't sense any bloodlust coming from it, not even a little bit. That means this thing hasn't been taking the fight seriously this entire time, and Haruka takes offense to that, so he gets up and charges at the Emperor one more time, but he is still outclassed in speed and ends up with a sword to his neck. The Dungeon Emperor could have killed him right there, but it didn't, and Haruka doesn't understand why it doesn't want to finish him off. Just then, Haruka notices that there's a lot of miasma swirling around the Dungeon Emperor, and it looks pretty sinister, so there's a possibility that the Dungeon Emperor is being forced to fight by the miasma. As he realizes this, his staff begins glowing and absorbing the miasma, so while Haruka has no idea why the hell his staff has the ability to do this, he just goes with it, and begins attacking with the intention of absorbing all the miasma. After a couple of swings, he manages to take out the concentration of miasma, and after it has all been absorbed, the Dungeon Emperor lowers its sword and just stands there. It looks like Haruka was right about it being forced to fight, and now he understands that the Dungeon Emperor has been looking for someone to put an end to its life so it would be free from the control of the miasma. That's why it didn't finish Haruka off when it had the chance, because it hoped Haruka would be the one to put an end to its suffering. Even though Haruka got rid of the miasma controlling the Emperor, there's still a ton of ambient miasma in the area, so sooner or later the Emperor is going to end up under the control of the darkness again. So Haruka needs to do something before that happens. At first, he considers killing the Emperor to get it over with, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, so he just hugs the Emperor instead because of all the pain she's had to go through. Coincidentally, this activates Haruka's subjugation skill, so the Emperor gets subjugated, and while he didn't intend for this to happen, it works out great because the Emperor can't be controlled by the darkness if she's being controlled by Haruka. Haruka can't tell what the Emperor thinks of the current situation, so he asks if she is mad that he subjugated her, but she shakes her head to tell him she's fine with it. Haruka is relieved to hear that, and this also confirms that she can understand him, so there shouldn't be much trouble communicating with her. Since they are on friendly terms now, Haruka decides to check the Emperor's stats to see if anything has changed, and to his surprise, her level got reset to level 1, which must be a side effect of the subjugation. In addition, he can now see the Emperor's name, so he finds out that she is called Angelica, and he starts freaking out because it just dawned on him that the Emperor is a girl, so class rep is going to yell at him again if she finds out he subjugated her. There's no point in worrying about that right now, so Haruka asks Angelica if she would like to get out of here with him, and she agrees, so the two of them head through the door and arrive on the 100th floor of the dungeon. Haruka uses his spatial awareness skill to scan the area, and he located a staircase at the edge of the room which should lead out of there, but as he and Angelica enter the room, they cause the floor boss to spawn in. Haruka is terrified because not only is he exhausted from his fight with Angelica, the only reason he survived that fight was because Angelica wasn't trying to kill him, but this level 100 living armor boss definitely has murder on its mind. Haruka would really like to get to the staircase without having to fight, but then he comes up with an idea to avoid the boss altogether. He prepares his earth magic and uses it on the ceiling to cause it to collapse, and he was planning to use airwalk to climb through the hole, but then he notices two minotaurs giving him a death glare. Just to make sure he knows what he's getting into, he appraises the monsters, and he is mortified to find out that they are level 99. It looks like he just made matters worse for himself because the minotaurs jump down to attack him as well, but luckily, they end up landing right on top of the living armor, so all three monsters lose a ton of HP, and Haruka seizes the opportunity to finish them off, and while he's picking up the magic crystals, he notices that Angelica is looking at the leftover armor the monsters dropped, so he tells her she can have it if she wants. Angelica excitedly puts the armor on, but it's a little too bulky for her, so Haruka doesn't think it's going to be a good fit. However, the armor suddenly begins to glow and changes its form to fit Angelica perfectly. Haruka is relieved that it fits her so well since she won't have her naked bones exposed anymore, but he is a little concerned since it's a set of magic armor they found in the dungeon, so he says he's going to appraise it to make sure it's safe. And let's just say the armor is not safe at all. It has the curse of binding on it, so now that Angelica has it on, she's never going to be able to take it off. Angelica gets mad that Haruka didn't warn her about this earlier, but she was already a skeleton, so it's not like she had many options for clothes anyway. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor, Haruka's classmates are still desperately looking for him. Everyone else thinks this is pointless since Haruka will probably just show up on his own and say something like he cleared the entire dungeon by himself. And while that definitely sounds like something he would do, class rep doesn't want to sit around and do nothing, so she leads everyone to the boss room so they can keep searching for him. But as soon as she opens it, they're all horrified to come face to face with a giant Cyclops as the floor boss. Back in the city, Mariel arrives at the guild and informs the guild master that something strange is going on in the dungeon. And while she's not sure what it is, she is worried things might get out of hand. The guild master says he hasn't received any reports from the guard he's stationed at the dungeon entrance, but Gadek reminds him that the guard that's stationed there has a room temperature IQ, so they can't really trust him to report anything important. They had better get themselves ready just in case something actually does happen. So After says he's going to go tell the guild members to prepare themselves. And speaking of preparing, the guild master asks where that group of new adventurers are since they would be really useful right now. Neither After nor Gadek have seen any of the classmates today, and it's normal for Haruka to disappear all the time. But if all the other are gone too, maybe something really is going on. Down on floor 98, Haruka has finally gotten Angelica to cheer up by giving her a cape to make her armor look nicer, but all of a sudden, he senses a monster nearby, so he uses his appraisal to try and figure out what it is. He discovers that the monster is a lich, and liches are immune to all physical attacks. So the only thing that would work on it is holy magic, and Haruka doesn't know how to use holy magic. He contemplates trying to open a hole in the roof to get out of here without having to fight the lich, but he doesn't know what crazy monster might fall through, so he can't risk doing that again. He may not have holy magic, but his staff seemed pretty effective against the miasma, so Haruka tries his luck and pokes the lich with it until it eventually disappears. He still doesn't understand how it works, but a win is a win. He and Angelica continue climbing, and when they get to the 97th floor, they come face to face with a bunch of venomous moth monsters. Haruka doesn't want to fight the moths directly because the venom will probably kill him, so he decides to play it smart and creates a giant fireball to lure all the moths in before burning them to ash with it. The two then move up to the 95th floor, and this time they are faced with venomous caterpillars that spew really sticky string. Getting through here without getting stuck to the string on the floor would be really difficult normally, but Haruka just decides to use earth magic to roll up the floor and squash all the caterpillars in the process. Things have been going well so far, but when Haruka and Angelica arrive on the 95th floor, something is clearly different compared to the other floors. They are suddenly attacked by the boss of this floor, and it's a living sword, but for some reason it's level 100 instead of 95. The sword tries to slash Haruka, but Haruka dodges out of the way and sneaks up behind it to counterattack. Unfortunately, the sword spots him before he can land a hit and moves out of the way, so Haruka is going to have to think of something else to stop it. The sword is moving in ways no humanoid could ever match, and to make it worse, it's even got helper swords that can attack Haruka from all directions, so there's no way he could even keep up with this thing. Just as he says this, he realizes that there's someone here who is fast enough to keep up with the sword monster, so he calls over to Angelica and asks her to tag in real quick. Angelica is more than happy to help, so she pulls out her sword and starts getting serious so she can take this thing down. The sword monster realizes that it's in deep trouble now, so it gets all its helper sword in formation and tries to block Angelica's attack, but as she charges at it, she easily slices it in half with one swing. Haruka is shocked that Angelica is still so strong since bosses usually get downgraded when they become allies, but with their combined strength, he is sure the two of them will be able to get out of this dungeon in no time. Meanwhile, on the 50th floor, Haruka's classmates are fighting for their lives against that Cyclops, and they are losing. Several of them have already been injured, so if they take another hit from that thing, they are going to be done for. The guys are all wondering what Haruka would do in a situation like this, and it's not like he has ever given them good advice, but they know Haruka would never give up in a situation like this, so Kakizaki and Oda come up with a plan together that might work. They pick the class rep off the ground and fill her in on the details, but she's against the idea since it's way too dangerous. However, they don't have many options, so class rep ends up agreeing and Kakizaki takes his position on the front lines to face the Cyclops. The Cyclops may be powerful, but it's slow, so Kakizaki thinks his acceleration skills should allow him to outpace it long enough to land a blow on its head. The girls in the class provide cover fire to keep the Cyclops distracted while Kakizaki approaches, but just as he was about to enter striking range, a Cyclops uses his other hand to swat Kakizaki away like a bug. He's really disappointed in himself for failing to land a single hit on the Cyclops, but it's fine since this was all part of the plan. He was just a decoy to keep the Cyclops distracted while Oda got his attack ready, and once Kakizaki is out of the way, Oda uses his ability to snipe the Cyclops through the eye. Meanwhile, Haruka and Angelica have just made it to the 85th floor, and the boss fights are getting a lot easier. But all of a sudden, they feel a tremor throughout the dungeon, and it seems like a dungeon stampede might be on the horizon. At the dungeon entrance, the brain-dead guard is finally starting to realize that something might be off about this place since monsters are spawning all over the place, so he runs back to town as fast as he can to warn them. Everyone was already on high alert in case something like this happened, but now that they have confirmation that the stampede is on its way, the guild master is really worried. As the monsters close in on the city, he knows they are doomed because the stampede has Machamp in it, but nevertheless, everyone is going to have to put up one hell of a last fight. After and Gattek are worried about Haruka's classmates since they are still in the dungeon right now, but there's nothing they can do to contact them right now. The guildmaster remembers reading something about dungeon stampedes once before, so he pulls out an old scroll and informs everyone of the lore surrounding dungeons. Dungeons are essentially living things in this world, so when they grow to their 100th floor, all the extra monsters that spawn there have nowhere to go and end up spilling out onto the surface. The others ask if there's anything they can do to stop it from happening, so the guildmaster keeps reading, and according to the scroll, once the boss on the lowest level is killed, the dungeon will cease to exist, so all the stampeding monsters should vanish as a result. But defeating the final boss of a dungeon is no easy feat, so it's not like someone could have already defeated the boss and is climbing up as we speak. Definitely not. Regardless, there's no way anyone in this room can pull that off, so the guildmaster tells Ofter to go get all the civilians into a nearby shelter, and he tells Gattek to go assemble all the available adventurers because he's not going down without a fight. Meanwhile, Haruka is still climbing out of the dungeon, and this floor has a bunch of griffins on it, so rather than fight them hand to hand, he decides to poison some fish and let the griffins eat it until they end up passing out. That's yet another floor cleared, and it's becoming a lot easier for him the higher Haruka climbs, but on the other hand, Haruka's classmates are really struggling with the lower floors. They are currently on the 54th floor, and they are still trying their best to move forward so they can find Haruka, but they soon come across an entire horde of werewolves, and they don't look very friendly. Up on the surface, the adventurers are gathered outside the city gate, and they've just finished dealing with the first wave of monsters from the dungeon, but at this rate, there is no telling how long they'll be able to last. As things stand, their only hope of getting through this is to defeat the dungeon boss, but they all know there's only one person capable of doing that, and that's Haruka. The guildmaster would like to send a message down into the dungeon to call for Haruka's help, but the adventurers here need to stay and defend the city, so the guildmaster asks Marielle to go instead since she's pretty much doing nothing. Marielle is shocked and starts shaking her head because she doesn't want to have to go, but Haruka is much more likely to listen to a request from a pretty girl like her, so she's the best option here. Although she isn't much of a fighter, so sending her into the dungeon alone would be a death sentence, which is why the guildmaster asks Ofter to go with her. Ofter is fine with it, but he is worried about leaving his post since the town needs all the defense it can get, but the guildmaster assures him that the rest of them will keep the town safe until he returns. Ofter ends up agreeing, so he asks Marielle to hurry so they can get to the dungeon as soon as possible, but Marielle is still freaking out because she doesn't want to go into the dungeon. However, she takes a look around and sees all the people who are injured and risking their lives for the sake of this city, so she gathers up all the courage she can muster and agrees to venture into the dungeon to find Haruka. Meanwhile, Haruka and Angelica have just made it to the 81st floor, and the entire floor looks like a crazy water park. He's so caught off guard by it that he doesn't notice that there are monsters in the water, so as the fish jump out and try to slice him up, Angelica is forced to step in and save him. Haruka apologizes for letting himself get distracted, but Angelica doesn't mind since she's having a lot of fun with him. Haruka takes a look in the water and notices that there are still a lot of fish swimming around in there, and if all those fishes attacked him at once, there's no way he'd come out in one piece. First things first, he has to find a way to deal with the speed of the fish, so he thinks back to that one Flash episode he saw a couple years ago and uses ice magic to completely freeze the fish inside the water. Eventually, the fish become encased in ice and float to the surface, so Haruka's plan seems to have worked. He keeps doing the same thing as he and Angelica cross the water, but then the floor boss shows up and sends a massive wave at Haruka and Angelica. Angelica was smart enough to jump out of the way in time, but Haruka's brain had the processing power of a potato for a second, so he just stood there as the wave closed in on him. Eventually, Haruka gets hit and is plunged deep into the water floor, so it looks like Angelica is going to have to face the monster on her own, but a few seconds later, Haruka emerges from the water with a homemade earth surfboard, and he uses it to close in on the fish monster before landing a fatal blow right in the middle of its head. Now that the big fish has been taken care of, Haruka jumps over to the exit with Angelica and asks her if she's alright. She tells him she's fine and Haruka is glad to hear it, so he says they should keep moving. He didn't really like it at first, but now he's starting to think this whole dungeon exploration thing is pretty fun, and with how strong he is, the bosses of the various floors aren't much of a threat to him any longer. As they continue to climb the dungeon floors, Haruka comes across several god-tier artifacts, like the Ring of Boundless Fortune, the Blessed Bangle, and a Necromancy Orb. All these things are really cool, and they are probably worth a lot of money, so Haruka can't decide whether he should keep them for himself or sell them for profit. He thinks about it for a second, and all these blessed items won't do him much good since he already has an ungodly amount of luck, and he doesn't have a curse to get rid of. That's why he decides to just give it all to Angelica, and while he's not sure if it will help or not, it should at least be able to bring Angelica good fortune in life even though she's forced to live her life cursed as a skeleton. Angelica is hesitant to take it at first since she doesn't want to take advantage of Haruka's kindness, but he literally has no use for any of this stuff. After a bit of convincing, Haruka finally manages to get her to agree to take the items, and she seems to be really happy about it since this is the first time someone has ever given her a gift. He doesn't understand why she seems so happy, but he's glad she likes it, so he suggests that they should keep going. Haruka doesn't realize it, all the blessed items he just gave Angelica managed to break both the curse of the armor and the curse that turned her into a skeleton, so she has her human form again, and she's starting to fall for Haruka, but she chooses to keep her broken curse a secret for now and runs after him. Up on the 54th floor, Haruka's classmates have just finished dealing with all the werewolves, and they are absolutely exhausted after all that fighting, but they have to keep going so they can find Haruka before something bad happens. Just then, they hear the sound of something approaching, and at first, everyone is worried that it might be a monster coming to attack them, but it turns out that it's just Mariel and After. Back at Haruka's end, Heat and Angelica have just arrived on the 74th floor, but this might be their toughest floor yet since the entire place is engulfed in flames. They start walking through the floor, but with all the flames, it's hard for Haruka to keep track of his surroundings, so he accidentally trips over a rock and nearly falls face first into a bunch of flames as a result. Luckily, Angelica catches him before he could get hurt, and since it would be dangerous for Haruka to continue walking in his current state, she points to a clearing on the floor and suggests that he should rest there for a little while. He really wishes he could find a way to escape this heat and cool off even if it's just for a little bit, but then he comes up with a really good idea. There was a small hole in the wall nearby, so Haruka used his wind magic to create a breeze to cool himself off in there. And coincidentally, the hole connects up to another hole that Class Rep was standing next to, so she's able to hear Haruka's voice and begins yelling to get his attention. Haruka recognizes her voice and realizes this hole must be connected to the same one he fell down at the start of this whole mess, so it's pretty lucky that he found it. Class Rep asks him if there's any way Haruka can climb up the hole to get to her, but he already tried that earlier, so he's sure he won't be able to make a vertical climb with his airwalk skill. He asks if Class Rep happens to have a rope she could throw down for him to use, but none of them thought that far ahead, so they didn't bring any climbing gear with them. Haruka asks Class Rep what floor she's on right now, and when she tells him she's on the 54th floor, he realizes he's not that far from her since he's on the 74th floor, so if he hurries, he should be able to make it up there in no time. He's about to get up and leave, but Class Rep calls him back because there's something else she needs to tell him. She informs Haruka that the city is being overrun with monsters and it won't last much longer unless they stop the stampede. While Mariel and After were on their way here, they saw the second wave of the stampede heading for the city, and while the city has been holding out till now, if a third wave hits, there's no way it will survive. They tell Haruka that the only way to stop the stampede is to defeat the dungeon boss, but as soon as she mentions the dungeon boss, Haruka realizes they are referring to Angelica. He tells Class Rep and the others that they already defeated the dungeon boss, and they are all amazed that he managed to do something like that, but if that's the case, then the stampede should have ended on its own. After asks Haruka if he's sure he finished the boss off because unless he kills it for good, the stampede won't be stopped. This is a serious dilemma for Haruka since if he doesn't kill Angelica, the town will most likely end up destroyed, but is he really willing to sacrifice her for the greater good? When he first encountered Angelica, he was perfectly fine with the idea of killing her, but now that he knows she was held hostage by the darkness of the dungeon for countless years, he can't bring himself to kill her. He tells them that he didn't kill the boss, nor does he intend to. He knows it may seem selfish, but he wants to find a way to save both Angelica and the town. And he thinks he might know a good way to save everyone from the stampede, but he's going to need Angelica's help for the plan to work though. Class Rep has no idea what Haruka is planning. But if he really believes he can make it work, then she's going to put her faith in him. He may be a little reckless at times, but when it matters the most, he always manages to pull through and keep everyone safe, so Class Rep is sure everything will be alright in the end. Haruka thanks her for having such confidence in him, and he swears that no matter what, he will save everyone in town and free Angelica from this dungeon. The second wave of monsters is closing in on Omiyu, and the adventurers gathered outside the city walls are doing their best to keep the monsters out. With the forces they have available right now, it'll be very difficult to hold them off, but the guild master tells everyone to fight with everything they've got because they have to protect their home. Meanwhile, down in the dungeon, Haruka needs to hurry and get out of the dungeon before the city is destroyed, so he asks Angelica if they can speedrun the rest of the ascent. Angelica doesn't mind, so the two start running to clear the remaining floors as quickly as possible. They soon arrive on the 73rd floor and are faced with two lizardmen, but without even stopping, Haruka recalls that reptiles are weak to cold, so he casts some ice magic to freeze them in place and has Angelica smash them to pieces. The next floor has a bunch of scorpions inside, but Haruka just uses a bunch of smoke to disorient them so Angelica can land a finishing blow. The following floor has a giant hellhound as its boss, and Haruka doesn't really have any convenient magic to deal with it. So instead he throws a stink bomb straight into the dog's nose, which serves as enough of a distraction for Angelica to take it out. After the hellhound is taken care of, Haruka takes a moment to organize all the loot they've been gathering so far, and he thinks it might be a good idea to just combine everything together since it might help them get through the dungeon quicker. Although he's a little disappointed that he still hasn't found the Rize ring he came down here for in the first place. He notices that Angelica looks a bit concerned by what he's doing, so he tells her there's something he wants to try when they get back to town, but that's not what she was concerned about. She thinks Haruka might be pushing himself a little too hard, so she wants him to rest a little, but while Haruka does feel exhausted, he can't afford to rest right now. The two then head up to the 69th floor, and this floor seems to be a forest stage, but there's no sign of the boss yet. Just then, an owl perches on a nearby branch, so Haruka appraises it, and it says the owl is the boss of this floor. It's called a sleep owl, so it probably has some sort of sleep ability, but before Haruka can take any action to prepare for its ability, the owl's eyes begin to glow and it attempts to inflict the sleep effect on Haruka. Normally, Haruka's well-being skill would negate all status effects inflicted on him, but it turns out that because he was already pushing himself so hard, he was too tired for his skill to activate, so he falls asleep almost instantly. A little while later, Haruka wakes up and finds Angelica carrying him on her back. While he was asleep, she took out the sleep owl and picked him up so they could keep going, but even though Haruka is awake now, she tells him he should rest a little while she carries him. Meanwhile, back with Haruka's classmates, they were trying to clear a few extra floors so they could get to Haruka sooner, but then they ran into this level 100 Sphinx, and they are severely outmatched by it. None of their attacks do any significant damage, and whatever minor damage they manage to inflict is instantly healed. Ofter tells them that attacking this thing is pointless because he has read about it before, and dungeon sphinxes can only be defeated by solving a puzzle. It is also immune to all kinds of attacks, making it pretty much immortal, so unless one of them is smart enough to figure out what the puzzle is, they are doomed. Haruka and Angelica have just made it to floor 59, and since Angelica has been carrying him most of the way up, Haruka feels really refreshed right now, but all of a sudden, his perception skill alerts him to something happening on the upper floor. He knows it can't be good, so he rushes up as quickly as possible. Up on the 57th floor, Haruka's classmates are on the verge of giving up because there's no way for them to defeat this thing. All their magical and physical attacks are useless against it, and they don't even know what puzzle they would have to solve to beat it, so it's hopeless. While despairing over their current situation, Class Rep loses track of the Sphinx, and by the time she realizes what's happening, it's about to stomp on her. Luckily, before Class Rep could be hurt, Haruka shows up, and he has already appraised the Sphinx, so he knows all about its immunity to attack damage. However, while Haruka was on his way down here, one of the items he picked up grants him the ability to negate all defenses, and that includes damage immunity, so after Haruka hits the Sphinx to disable its defense, Angelica jumps in and finishes it off by slashing its head. Now that the Sphinx has been defeated and no one's in danger anymore, Haruka lands and greets everyone, saying he's finally back. Everyone is relieved to see him because if Haruka hadn't shown up, they'd be dead meat, but Class Rep is a little curious about the Night Lady standing next to him. Haruka is about to explain everything that happened while he was stuck at the bottom of the dungeon, but all of a sudden, the floor beneath his feet collapses and he nearly falls all the way back to the bottom floor. Luckily, after the first time this happened, Haruka learned to be more cautious about his surroundings, so he jumps back up using the falling rubble and returns to the floor. He tells the others that there's no need to worry because he's not going to fall for the same trap twice. But it happens a third time and Haruka wasn't prepared for it, so he really is going to fall this time. However, Class Rep refuses to let that happen, so she jumps after Haruka to catch him before he falls. She has learned from her previous failure as well, so this time she doesn't miss Haruka's hand and manages to pull him up in time. Everyone is relieved that Haruka didn't fall all the way down into the labyrinth again, but they don't have much time to celebrate because the next wave of the stampede is already on its way and it's absolutely massive compared to the previous ones. If a wave of this size makes it to Onmui, then there's no chance of the city surviving. Class Rep turns to Haruka and asks him if he really has a plan to stop all these monsters, so Haruka confirms that he knows a way to stop the monsters and says Angelica is the key. However, they don't have enough time for Haruka to explain the entire plan, so After tells everyone to head for the teleportation gate so they can get back to Onmui as soon as possible. While they are running for the gate, Class Rep asks Haruka how he managed to defeat all those powerful monsters and make it up here. Haruka tells her he probably couldn't have made it out through normal means, but with a little luck and ingenuity, even someone like him can make it out alive. Eventually, the group makes it back to Onmui and finds Gaitek and the Guildmaster sitting on the hill outside the city. They are glad to see that reinforcements have finally arrived, but then Mariel directs their attention to the huge horde of monsters approaching, and when I say huge, I mean it's absolutely massive. Even Haruka wouldn't be capable of taking on this many monsters at once, so what little hope the Guildmaster had is instantly destroyed. The entire city is shaken to its core by the footsteps of the army of monsters approaching, and the Lord of Onmui is trying his best to calm all the people hiding in the church, so he tells them that he is sure the adventurers will save the city. Meanwhile, all the adventurers outside the city have pretty much given up because the scale of this stampede is simply too much. Haruka turns to Angelica and tells her to do what they discussed earlier, so she walks ahead of everyone else and draws her sword before sticking it straight into the ground. A large amount of energy begins pouring out of her sword, and Haruka explains that Angelica may not be as she was when he fought her in the dungeon, but she is still the Dungeon Emperor, so she holds absolute control over all the monsters from that dungeon. And as the Dungeon Emperor, she has the power to get rid of each and every one of those monsters. As the wave of energy hits them, the monsters begin disappearing one after another until every single one of them is gone. And once the crisis has been averted, Haruka walks up to Angelica to congratulate her with a celebratory fist bump. It is a relief that all the monsters are gone, but all of Haruka's classmates are extremely confused and asking how he did it. Haruka explains that he didn't actually do anything here, so the one they should be thanking is Angelica. And once he says this, Oda from the Nerds figures out that Angelica must be the Dungeon Emperor. Upon hearing this, everyone asks if that means Angelica is a monster, but Haruka tells them there's no need to worry about Angelica hurting anyone because he spent a lot of time with her in the dungeon and he knows she's a nice person. They all find it hard to believe, but since Haruka says she's safe, they take his word for it. Oda still has some questions though, because from what he has read, the Dungeon Emperor is meant to be the most powerful being within the dungeon. Haruka calls Oda creepy for knowing so much random information, but he's right about Angelica being the strongest in the dungeon. In fact, even after her level got reset, she is still incredibly broken as a fighter, so she was able to overpower all the monsters they fought in the dungeon. So Haruka figured she could probably use that power to command the monsters and get rid of them. Although, what Angelica did only works on monsters from her dungeon, and they all have to be relatively close to her for it to work, so she wouldn't be able to stop an attack from a different dungeon if another stampede occurred at some point. While they are on the topic of what Angelica did, the girls ask if Angelica vaporized the monsters, but Haruka clarifies that the monsters are all still alive. All Angelica did was teleport them back and issue an order for them to stay inside the dungeon. But since it was the Dungeon Emperor that gave the order, Haruka is sure the monsters won't be coming out anytime soon. And that means that the city of Onwee will remain safe for the foreseeable future, so everything can go back to normal now. The next day, Haruka comes up with a good idea on how to use all the equipment he got from the dungeon. So he spends some time organizing his inventory and asks class rep to gather all their classmates. Once everyone arrives, they all see a bunch of treasure laid out on the tables in front of them, and it's all super rare and valuable, so they are really excited. Haruka then announces that he is holding a super special sale for them, so they are free to pick out whatever they want, but they will still have to pay him for it though. Both the boys and girls are ready to compete with each other for the best items, but once the sale actually begins, the girls go crazy with Black Friday fever and turn the sale into a battlefield. A bunch of the guys are too scared to go anywhere near them at this point, and Haruka feels a little bad for them, so he offers a special deal and pulls out a bunch of extra equipment he wasn't planning on selling. After a while, everyone has bought the stuff they wanted and they all look happy with their purchases, so Haruka is satisfied. The new gear should help keep his classmates safe, so the only thing left for him to worry about is what to do with Angelica. She's going to be stuck in town with everyone for a while, but after being stuck in the dungeon by herself for so many years, Haruka gets the feeling she might not be used to socializing, so he's worried she might not get along with the rest of the girls. All of Haruka's classmates are still overjoyed with the amazing loot they got, and Haruka is equally happy because he just made a boatload of money selling the items. He's still in the middle of counting all of his money when class rep comes up to him, so he hastily puts it all away and turns to ask her what she needs. Class rep says she wants Haruka to properly introduce her to Angelica and tell her how he managed to become friends with her since she's the dungeon emperor. She assumes Haruka must have used the Rize ring to make Angelica like him, but Haruka tells her he never actually found the ring. He admits that it was actually his subjugate skill that turned Angelica into his companion, but then class rep starts yelling at him for using his subjugate skill on another girl. She demands to know how this happened, but Haruka doesn't really have an explanation to give, so instead, class rep decides to ask Angelica for the details and drags her off. Haruka is glad he doesn't have to deal with class rep's yelling this time, but he's also worried if Angelica will be alright talking with her alone. Class rep gathers all the girls in one room so they can all listen to Angelica's story, but it's pretty awkward since Angelica hasn't said a word yet. Even so, the girls are still eager to learn about her, so class rep goes up to Angelica and asks her if she can tell them about herself, even if it's little by little. The girls eventually learn that Angelica was trapped in the deepest parts of the dungeon, but Haruka rescued her, and instead of killing her, Haruka used his subjugate skill to break the curse that had kept her trapped in the dungeon. After hearing all of this, class rep feels the need to do something special for Angelica, so she invites her to join all of them for a bath. At this point, everyone still believes Angelica is a skeleton, so when they start helping her take off her armor, they are shocked to see such healthy thighs instead of skeleton bones. Meanwhile, back in Haruka's room, he is happy to finally get to sleep in his bed again, but he's a little disappointed that he never found the Rize ring. On the bright side, his little dungeon adventure raised his level 6 times and earned him a bunch of amazing new skills, but even with his increased stats, he realizes he never could have stopped the stampede if it weren't for Angelica and others. If he truly wants to live the life of a loner, then he has to be strong enough to fight on his own without relying on help from others, so he thinks it's about time that he heads back into the woods. The next morning, rather than sneak out of the city, Haruka decides to just ask class rep if she's okay with him leaving for a while, and class rep doesn't seem to mind since nothing serious is going on in town right now. But she has more pressing matters on her mind because after what she saw yesterday, she realizes that Angelica is back normal and Angelica is kinda hot. So she's a little worried that Angelica might steal Haruka away from her. Speaking of Angelica, Haruka asks her if she wants to come along with him since he's going into the woods, and Angelica happily agrees. A little while later, Haruka and Angelica make it out into the woods, and Haruka is loving the fresh breeze since it has been so long since he was last here. Since they're out here, Haruka wants to practice a little with his new gear shift skill, so he asks Angelica if she thinks she can keep up with him, and Angelica nods in agreement. Haruka takes off running and practically teleports from one spot to another, but the incredible speed is still pretty hard for him to control, so he accidentally ends up falling off the side of the cliff. Fortunately, all falls he took in the dungeon have taught him to always be prepared, so he safely lands on his feet. Angelica soon catches up to him, so she peeks over the edge of the cliff to make sure Haruka is alright, but she fails to notice the slippery mushrooms on the cliff's edge, so she ends up falling off as well. Luckily, Haruka manages to catch her, and he's glad Angelica is alright, but he's surprised at how heavy she is for a skeleton, and Angelica is pretty much dying of embarrassment in Haruka's arms. Later that night, Haruka brings Angelica back to his house and heads to the bathroom to enjoy a nice, relaxing soak in the tub. He even jokingly offers to let Angelica join him in here. But Angelica didn't realize the offer was a joke, so she takes him up on his offer and walks into the bathroom. Haruka is surprised that Angelica actually wants to take a bath with him, and he's even more shocked when he sees a beautiful blonde girl standing there instead of a skeleton. He stands up, completely forgetting that he's not wearing a towel, and asks if the girl is really the same Angelica he knows. Angelica confirms it, so Haruka gets out of the bath and says they need to talk. The two of them both take a seat on Haruka's bed, and Haruka has a lot of questions to ask, but first, he wants to know if Angelica can talk now. Since she's human again, and Angelica does have vocal cords, but she hasn't talked for so long that she doesn't remember how to, so instead, she uses various hand signs to explain how she ended up like this. As the Dungeon Emperor, Angelica was reduced to nothing but a skeleton, but she put on that living armor. It had a curse that made it bind to the user's flesh, so the armor restored Angelica's flesh on a technicality. And then Haruka gave her a blessed bangle which negated the armor's curse of binding. Additionally, the Necromancy Jewel and the Ring of Fortune restored her life force and autonomy, so all these overlapping effects turned her back into a regular human. Haruka is basically responsible for returning her humanity, so Angelica has been helping him as her way of saying thanks. Haruka appreciates the fact that she wants to repay him, but he feels like he might be robbing her of her freedom like this, so he tells her she doesn't need to stick around him anymore if she doesn't want to. He wants her to know that she's free to do whatever she wants, but Angelica refuses to leave Haruka's side because what she wants is to stay with him. Haruka realizes that Angelica doesn't want to be alone, so he decides to stay with her a little longer, and to cheer her up, he asks if she wants to hear a fun story. From there, Haruka spent the entire night yapping about whatever came to mind, and Angelica really enjoyed listening to him. The next morning, Haruka and Angelica head out, and Haruka asks Angelica if she would like to have a little training match with him. Angelica isn't opposed to the idea, but she wonders why he suddenly wants to fight, so Haruka explains that he has been working on a new skill recently, and he wants to test it out to see how much he has improved over the last couple of days. Angelica agrees to help him practice, so the two of them face off against each other, and Haruka already knows Angelica was holding back against him when they fought in the dungeon. So now that he asked her to go all out against him, he's sure she will be a lot faster than before. However, he intends to use his new shift skill to overcome the speed gap, so as the match begins, Angelica charges forward, and Haruka uses gear shift to evade her initial strikes. He jumps back to create some distance and prepares himself for a counterattack. So he rushes towards Angelica and tries hitting her with his staff, but she blocks it and hits Haruka on the head instead. Haruka falls to the ground in defeat, and Angelica comes over to check if he's alright, but aside from the pain of his loss, he's perfectly fine. He may not have been able to outpace Angelica this time, but he's starting to get the hang of the gear shift, so he's sure he will surpass Angelica's speed someday. But for now, all this training has really worked up his appetite, so Haruka asks Angelica if she wants to get something to eat with him. Angelica nods in agreement, so he takes her down to the river and shows her how he catches fish with his lightning skill. After gathering all the fish, he puts them in a basket, and the two start walking home so they can prepare it. But Haruka is getting sick of grilling the fish all the time, so he suggests they should make a hot pot instead. When they get home, Haruka starts working in the kitchen, and Angelica wants to help too, but she has never used a kitchen knife before, so Haruka gets behind her to give her some guidance. And Angelica seems to be enjoying it since she gets to spend quality time with Haruka. Once the meal is finally ready, it looks amazing, so Haruka and Angelica dig in, and after they are both done eating, Haruka is absolutely stuffed. However, Angelica seems a little anxious, so Haruka asks her if there's something on her mind. Angelica is too embarrassed to say anything, so instead she grabs Haruka's hand and drags him to the bedroom before asking him to take a seat next to her. Haruka is still a little confused about what's going on, but he does as she says and sits down. However, Angelica then moves closer and goes behind him, so this can only mean one of two things. Angelica is way too innocent for the second option, so Haruka correctly guesses that she just wants to give him a normal massage, and Angelica confirms it, explaining that she wants to show her gratitude for everything he has done for her. Since she's trying to be nice, Haruka agrees to let her give him a massage. But Angelica sucks at giving massages. With every touch, Haruka can hear his bones crack, and not in the good way. But Angelica is trying her best, so he pretends that she did a really good job. Even though she already gave Haruka a massage, Angelica still feels like doing something else for him, so she asks if there's anything Haruka wants. And since she is offering, Haruka asks her to come outside with him for a bit. Outside, the two of them sit on a bench to look up at the stars, but Angelica is feeling a little embarrassed, so she's keeping her distance from Haruka. He tells her she doesn't have to sit so far away from him and gives her a head pat, but that just makes her even more embarrassed, so she backs away from him. She wants to convey her feelings to him properly, so she tries her best to say the words, but she's still having trouble speaking, so she turns away in shame. Haruka tells her she doesn't have to push herself so hard because knows she's trying her best to make progress. But if Angelica is going to improve her communication skills, Haruka can't drag her into his loner lifestyle, so he suggests they should head back to the city tomorrow. The next day, Haruka and Angelica are walking back together, but all of a sudden, it starts raining, so Haruka grabs Angelica's hand and pulls her along so they can run through the rain before they get wet. Back in town, Angelica and Haruka finally make it back and all the girls are excited to see them again. But they are even more excited about Haruka and Angelica's relationship since the two of them are clearly holding hands. Haruka and Angelica realize what they are doing and immediately become embarrassed and let go, but it's too late since all the girls already saw it, so they all swarm around Angelica and start asking all kinds of details about the time she spent with Haruka. Angelica is a little overwhelmed, so class rep blows her whistle to break it up and officially welcomes Angelica back. Haruka thanks class rep for looking after Angelica and says he will be counting on her from now on. But while Angelica may not be getting hounded anymore, the guys start hassling Haruka and asking him for all the details of his date with Angelica, but Haruka just yells at them until they leave. Just then, Angelica comes over to Haruka, and she seems nervous because she has something she wants to say. Haruka listens as she says her first word to thank him for everything he has done for her, and he couldn't be more proud of her. Since coming to this world, Haruka has realized that everyone has their own struggles to deal with, and in a sense that means they are all loners in their own way, but they all have each other to rely on, so Haruka can rest assured that they will be alright, and that means he can continue to master this world alone. This was the final episode. Subscribe for more anime recaps.